From the top rope and the Great American Bash, I bid you all good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you may be in this great land of ours or around the world. Welcome to the $55 million studio on the Pro Wrestle Machine. Let's get into this one. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine. August 17, 1998 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. WCW Road Wild Pay-Per-View Review. K1 American Debut, tons more. By Observer Staff. Jay Leno wrestled. Sort of. Well, he was in a wrestling match and grabbed one hold and threw two punches and did a double-team clothesline and scored the pin over Eric Bischoff at the end, to apparently prove that he was really the king of late-night television. He was terrible athletically, but was kept well hidden and he really didn't embarrass himself. Actually, the main event at Road Wild, which saw Hulk Hogan and Diamond Dallas Page once again work with non-wrestlers, this time two men who hardly qualify as world-class athletes, but it still blew away their match last month, probably because they knew to keep things shorter and simpler and because Hogan and Page worked a lot better this time out. Not that it would qualify as anything even close to a good match, but it wasn't that bad and the people there live were into it, which is something that can't be said about just about every match on the show. Road Wild is the car wreck of wrestling pay-per-view shows. A yearly disaster waiting to happen, and this year's version was by far the worst of the three. In fact, had either Hogan had his usual non-working boots on during the main event, or had Chris Jericho vs. Juventud Guerrera never taken place, it would have been the single worst pay-per-view show in history. As it was, it has to live with the distinction of being just a really bad show. In front of a free, largely biker crowd estimated by those live at anywhere from 8,500 to 12,000, of course exaggerated on the air by Bobby Heenan as 35,000 to 40,000, in the midst of the famed Sturgis rally, WCW's attempts at a speedy self-destruction of what was just a few weeks back among the hottest wrestling promotions in history during a period, and the industry itself is on fire, was revved up to near warp speed. Everyone ahead of time knows the problems with running the show in Sturgis. For a hot promotion, which WCW still is, you are talking about giving away anywhere from a $200,000 to $350,000 gate away plus another $100,000 or more in merchandise. They did sell $29,639 worth of merchandise at the event. Years back, when WCW wasn't running profitable arena and merchandise business and it was trying to establish an identity as being something different, the idea of beach shows and location PPVs and nitros made sense. Nowadays, the company has outgrown that type of thing and the only one that still works is the annual Nitro Nightclub show in Pensacola, Florida, as part of Spring Break, which has been a big rating success. You are almost guaranteed poor crowd reactions for free outdoor shows in the heat, and this show, performed in front of a crowd which consists of largely non-wrestling fans, only exacerbates that problem. And for a company working so hard at escaping the stereotype of the redneck southern toothless wrestling crowd, no show during the year perpetuates that myth of who watches wrestling any more than this show. Horrible matches. Mind-boggling booking. Horrible crowd reactions. And as bad as it was, it could have been worse. Like originally, the Steve McMichael vs. Bryan Adams match was scheduled to go 17 minutes. Luckily it was cut to 7 minutes, so the two had only the worst match of the show instead of the worst match perhaps of a lifetime. Yet that match didn't even stand out, as there were literally 6 matches out of 9, including the main event and the Battle Royal, a second from the top, that one could make a case for being, at least from technical standards, the worst match of the show and several as worst matches of the year candidates. You had Meng vs. Barbarian. A terrible match between two guys whose prime seems to have been in the last century. And to make the finish even more exciting, they had a run-in involving the single worst performer in the business today, Jim Duggan. You had Disco Inferno and Alex Wright versus Public Enemy in a terrible cartoon brawl which saw the key spot of the match, the teeter-totter ladder spot, go awry and barely graze Disco, who was supposed to be knocked silly by the blow. As it was, it took PE more time to set up 3 tables on top of each other than it takes 300,000 channel clickers to switch stations when they see Jeff Jarrett on the air, and still had to leave more time to put Disco on top of those tables for the climactic table break spot. Stevie Ray vs. Chavo Guerrero Jr. was bad on a totally different level, because it involved a very good worker and one of the most incomprehensible gimmicks ever. Chavo has become a scary monster, yet can't beat anyone of any level in a match, and can't even be competitive against a very large but third-rate star. He ran away for about 2 minutes, with one announcer saying it might be good strategy because he's trying to tire out the bigger man, which actually made sense since Ray was chasing him, and the other announcer killing off drama faster than you can say, will never submit and thereby kill the drama of his foe tries any submission hold, by responding that Stevie Ray won't get tired out. It was also billed as a TV title match, and you can scratch your head trying to figure that one out. Then Rick Steiner, wearing jeans and cowboy boots and clearly not being ready to wrestle, came out to wrestle Scott despite it being made clear on Thunder a few days earlier the match wasn't taking place. While it was funny Scott with an oxygen mask on laid out as if he was near death, and later getting off his deathbed and running away, and it would have been a good angle in another setting, after so many bad matches, to tell fans the match at least some people still thought was going to take place. And in reality it never was until September because neither brother is healed up from shoulder and back injuries respectively, would instead be on the next pay-per-view had to go over as bad to those at home as it did to this live, and that was pretty bad. But that was a perfect prelude to the unadvertised bonus matchup of McMichael versus Adams. They were missing spots so badly that nobody even knew what spots they were trying and screwing up in the first place. Then in the mind-boggling booking decision of the year, Bill Goldberg, with no opponents ready to challenge him for the title, eliminated everyone except Kevin Nash, who walked out himself no doubt as a booking compromise to him since many in upper management were already legitimately scared he wasn't going to show up in the first place, in winning a battle royal. At the end, Goldberg used the tackle and jackhammer on Giant, thereby ending any curiosity over what is going to happen when the two meet in the various upcoming house show main events and killing intrigue in a potential pay-per-view match against probably the only opponent aside from Hogan that he possibly could draw against. You couldn't have booked that match dumber had you tried. Then came the Leno match. Whether this match was a success or not depends upon what the buy rate is. Some would try and defend the idea as a success with a poor buy rate combined with the reported $1 million, a figure that could easily be as inflated as most celebrity pay figures in wrestling are, by saying the company got great publicity for nearly 2 weeks on The Tonight Show, and it did. But the whole idea of that publicity itself is that the pub makes money by either increasing TV ratings, and this angle didn't accomplish that in the least, or by drawing a big buy rate. One would think the buy rate should be well above average, but if it isn't, anything below 425,000 buys can't be a success considering the state of the industry today, although anything above that figure should be considered successful, and industry estimates going in were that it would be far in excess of that figure, although industry estimates were much higher than reality for the Malone match last month. Leno didn't end up getting WCW 10% of the pub that Malone and Rodman did, as the sports world totally ignored it, and the entertainment world largely did. While every media outlet in the civilized world was in San Diego, the only big player in Sturgis was Pat O'Brien of Access Hollywood, and the fact they played it up big was because their competition, Entertainment Tonight, considered the major league show on that playing field, decided to pass having done its fill of wrestling stories of late. Several NBC stations did play clips on the news, and clips also aired on Good Morning America, but most of the media, which acknowledged last month's main event, passed on this one. The match was a catalyst for the cover story in the Life section of USA Today on August 6th, although that story inspired by the match still had a WWF slant to it. And most importantly, while Leno's ratings were helped a bit by all this, the show at the Angle drew about 0.2 higher than a typical Wednesday night. The same can't be said for WCW. To show just how little they were going to allow Leno to do, his total work consisted of dodging Hogan a few times while the announcers put over his speed, training and conditioning, which was a bit hard to take. He and Page threw a double clothesline with Jay 2 steps slow in keeping up. He threw 2 of the worst punches you'll ever see in a pro wrestling ring on Bischoff. He also grabbed a standing wrist lock, or at least something resembling that, on Hogan, which was clearly Hogan's spot to give Leno a fence on him to hopefully get his photo in mainstream magazines. He rammed Bischoff's head into the buckles several times. Leno, 48, was purported to be a former high school wrestler, although if he had any previous athletic ability, age had done its number, completely eliminating it. Actually, considering he's only done one actual match previously, Bischoff did a good job in the match. The finish was supposed to have Leno using the diamond cutter, a relatively simple move to learn, on Bischoff, but they didn't trust him to do it and instead had Eubanks do it, and Leno scored the pin on Bischoff. After the match, the heels jumped the babyfaces to allow Bill Goldberg, wearing his title belt, to do a run-in and tackle both Hogan and Bischoff, Bischoff again doing a professional job. This was smart because the in-ring celebration had Leno, Eubanks, Page and Goldberg wearing the title belt, again a setup spot which hopefully would get Goldberg's photo into the mainstream media. In that way, the final match was very smartly done, and really not all that bad to watch. 1. Mang Yuli Fifida, pin Barbarian, Sinvalahi, in 4:48. They opened the match doing a series of sumo spots. Since both have a sumo background, it would have meant something had this match taken place in Japan, where sumo is a national sport. Instead, it looked like a rhino mating ritual. When these 300-pound monsters threw the sumo chops that are a legit tactic in that sport to knock a guy out of his circle, to American drunk bikers, it must have looked like Richard Simmons in a street fight. Of course there was no heat. Wrong guys to get heat. Wrong place to get heat. Barbarian loaded his boot, but before he could throw the kick, Meng clamped on the Tongan death grip. After the match, Morris ran in and he, Barbarian, and Jimmy Hart beat on Meng. Meng made his own comeback, but was beaten down again until Jim Duggan showed up with a 2x4. Not only did nobody care about Duggan's save, but there was no crowd reaction at all to Duggan's music, which usually garners the easiest mindless pop because it constitutes American patriotism. Dud. 2. Public Enemy, Ted Petty and Mike Durham, beat Disco Inferno, Glenn Gilberti, and Alex Wright in 15:27. I mean, they had to kill a lot of time, but putting PE out there for 15 minutes. Magnum Tokyo showed up as well. Magnum gave Wright a garbage can and wore it out on grunge. Rocco Rock went to the back and cleaned house with a ladder. It was announced in the middle of the match that the rules had changed and this was now a street fight. Disco and Wright left and came back with tables. PE left and came back with a toilet seat, a kitchen sink, a mailbox and a cookie sheet. If you notice in these matches, Wright never takes hard head shots and it's always Disco that goes through the table as a precautionary measure due to Wright's aneurysm from last year. Instead, when Rock pounded on him with the garbage can, it was to his elbow and back. Magnum accidentally hit Wright, who left. Then they totally blew the teeter-totter ladder spot with Disco. Then Magnum left. Then they spent literally minutes setting up the table and poor Disco still had to sell. Disco was put on the tables and Rock climbed up with lighting stand and fell off, breaking 3 tables. It was the only pop of the match. Magnum showed back up and leapt off the top, but Grunge moved, and he hit Disco, allowing Grunge to pin Disco. -1 star. 3. In what was billed as a Falls Count Anywhere in Sturgis match, Perry Saturn, Perry Sotelo won a 3-way over Raven, Scott Levy, and Canyon Chris Klusaritis in 12:26. They worked hard, as you'd figure given who was in the match, with a few really cool spots, but overall the match didn't work as the crowd could have cared less, and there is something about this 3-way feud that breeds disinterest. The other negative was after listing the stip as Falls Count Anywhere within the city limits, one expects some sort of spots where they go down the street, take a bus, etc., and instead it was no different than any other match with only a token amount of outside the ring area action. To establish early on that Canyon wasn't in the flock, after Raven hit Saturn with a chair, he gave the chair to Canyon, but Canyon instead hit Raven with the chair. After a combination back suplex and neckbreaker spot, Saturn and Canyon did the total elimination, which, as you can imagine, wasn't acknowledged by the announcers, on Raven for a near fall in a move that meant nothing to the audience live. Canyon gave Raven 3 Russian leg sweeps and Saturn came off the top with a leg drop, but Canyon then saved Raven, to show that every one of the 3 wanted the win themselves. At this point it became that repetitive garbage in every triangle match under these first winner rules where the third man continually makes saves, although at least this one had a better finish than recent 3-way bouts on Raw. Canyon used a combination fisherman suplex and neckbreaker spot. Raven hit both men with a chair. Canyon did a pescado out of the ring on both. Raven took real hard guard rail shots. Raven suplexed Canyon on the ramp. Canyon gave Saturn a pile driver on the ramp, but Raven saved. Raven dropkicked Canyon from the stage area and Canyon rolled down the ramp. Saturn came off the stage and delivered a clothesline to both. Back in the ring they delivered some really cool spots that the crowd didn't care about. The same double sleeper into a double jawbreaker in every ECW 3-way, and a move where Canyon was on Raven's shoulders doing a superplex on Saturn. Raven DDT'd Saturn but Canyon saved. Canyon then climbed a lighting stand for a splash onto Raven, who was on the platform, but Lodi pulled Raven out of the way and Canyon crashed and burned, taking him out of the match. Saturn used a Death Valley driver on Raven but Lodi saved. Saturn then delivered a T-bone suplex to Lodi. Horace Boulder showed up with a stop sign. When Saturn ducked, Lodi's powder throw went into Boulder's eyes. The blinded Boulder accidentally hit both Lodi and then Raven, after Saturn ducked again, with the stop sign, and Saturn used the Death Valley driver on Raven again to score the pin. The finish looked a lot worse than it reads as Boulder's timing on everything was pretty bad. If you eliminate the run-ins at the end and put the body of the match in a regular arena, it would have been a good match, but it was bad in this setting. 1 3/4 stars. 4. Rey Mysterio Jr., Oscar Gutierrez, Pin Psicosis, Dionisio Castellanos, in 13:38 of a match where the winner was billed to earn a shot at the Cruiserweight title. This was a better than average match, but taken way down in this setting. Actually, it was the first match of the show to get any crowd reaction, and Mysterio Jr. was the first wrestler to come out that the crowd seemed to remotely care about, although by regular standards this didn't have much heat either. The first actual pop for a wrestling move, other than the table breaks spot, came when Mysterio Jr. did a handspring into a head scissors. Psychosis used a power bomb off a blocked Hurricane Rana. Because of the ring situation, with a platform outside the ring area several feet over concrete, it added several feet to the drop when doing dives, making them that much more dangerous, and with Mysterio Jr.'s bad knee, they toned down that aspect of the match, which is a big part of their typical match. Between the bad setting and bad crowd, this was nowhere close to the level of match you'd expect from these two on a major show. Mysterio Jr. did a Japanese Ocean Cyclone suplex. He also did a great rocker dropper, but using both legs instead of one. Mysterio Jr. ended up winning with a springboard Hurricane Rana, although Psychosis in going over landed on his head, making the move actually miss its targeted look, but actually look more impressive in the process. 2 stars. 5. Stevie Ray Lane Huffman pinned Chavo Guerrero Jr., Salvador Guerrero 3, to retain the TV title in 2:38. I guess the new rule for undercard titles is if someone is injured, the title reverts to next of kin. There's some comedy to the Stevie Ray routine claiming the title, but when WCW actually announces his matches at TV title matches, it switches from being heel heat to simply titles that mean nothing. And boy does this TV title mean nothing right now. Stevie Ray refused to shake Chavo's hand because of what happened last show. Let's see, last show Chavo submitted to the handshake. Figure that logic out. Chavo ran away due to the ridiculous size difference. Finally Chavo threw some punches that Ray laughed off. Let's just kill Chavo's credibility completely, and Ray slapjacked him. After the match, Ray wanted to continue to beat on Chavo, but A came out and actually made the save. I guess we're ending the Chavo Eddie angle. -1 star. Steiner brother angle took place here. J.J. Dillon came out and ordered the match for fall brawl, and if Scott doesn't wrestle, he's suspended for life. Hopefully Scott doesn't really hurt himself in the last month, because then they'll be embarrassed again. 6. Steve McMichael pinned Bryan Adams in 6:32. After one of the most messed up spots you'll ever see, McMichael delivered. This was the idea of the worst DDT in history. McMichael did take a good bump over the top from a clothesline. Adams used a backbreaker and then missed a knee drop. McMichael hit 2 tackles, and who knows what was supposed to happen next that didn't, as it seemed both guys went for a move. Then they both stood there and froze. Adams picked McMichael up for a pile driver, but McMichael's legs barely grazed the ref, who was knocked unconscious. Vincent then went to hit McMichael with a chair, but he ducked and Adams got it. McMichael punched Vincent and gave a tombstone pile driver to Adams, and the ref revived to count the fall. It doesn't get much worse than this. -2 stars. 7. Juventud Guerrera and Anibal Gonzalez won the WCW Cruiserweight title from Chris Jericho, Chris Irvine, in 1624 in a match with Dean Malenko as referee. Jericho came out wearing a kimono. There must be some sort of a double meaning to that one. Malenko played unbiased ref most of the way, although he did pull Jericho's hair early. It was acknowledged that years ago Malenko worked as a referee for one summer, I believe around the summer of 1987, although the year could be off by one, working for the WWF, although obviously the company name wasn't acknowledged. Jericho is the perfect heel for this kind of a crowd, and the match itself actually got over and stole the show. Jericho took a fall off the platform, crashing onto the guardrail. Guerrera then did a springboard plancha all the way from the top rope to the concrete, which is a double drop, and Guerrera appeared to injure his knee on landing. His hit cracked the concrete. Jericho did a double power bomb and a springboard shoulder block spot outside the ring on the ramp. Both traded hard chops. If there was one positive thing to say about the crowd, this was the only pro wrestling crowd in the United States that didn't chant "Who" when a hard chop was thrown. Guerrera used a high-angle DDT and a juvie driver for near falls. Guerrera went to the top, but Jericho shook the ropes, causing him to crotch himself. Jericho delivered a superplex, followed by the Lion Tamer, but Guerrera made the ropes. Jericho argued with Malenko. Guerrera accidentally slugged Malenko when Jericho moved. Jericho hit Guerrera with the title belt, and Jericho tried to revive Malenko, but Guerrera kicked out. Jericho threw a ton of Kawada-like knees. Guerrera climbed the ropes, and for some reason Malenko threw him down. Jericho then kicked Malenko, aiming at Guerrera. Guerrera then ran at Malenko, and Malenko propelled him in midair into a Frankensteiner off the top onto Jericho for the pin. The finish was a real thing of beauty. Malenko decked Jericho after the match. 3.5 stars. 8.
Bill Goldberg won a 9-man battle royal featuring 8 members of NWO Wolfpack vs. NWO Hollywood in 7:58.
Goldberg backflipped Scott Hall out at 1:25. Kevin Nash, whom management was concerned about not even showing up until the day of the event, and got to be the only wrestler in the match that Goldberg didn't eliminate as he simply walked out over the top rope at 1:35 to try and pound on Hall. Goldberg bloodied his lip. Match died about 4 minutes in. Goldberg threw out Conan Charles Ashenoff in 4:56. Goldberg speared and threw out Kurt Hennig in 6:47. Goldberg then clotheslined Sting, Steve Borden, and Scott Norton out in 6:53. Goldberg speared and threw out Lex Luger, Larry Fall, in 7:09.
Giant then choke slammed Goldberg, who popped right back up, speared Giant, delivered the jackhammer, and pinned him clean in the middle.
It was a good finish for the moment, but it made absolutely no sense from a booking standpoint to do that finish on pay-per-view at this time. This was the first match where the audience seemed to have a vague idea who the wrestlers were. Although none got big pops, they seemed to at least get the reaction as recognizable stars. Goldberg's reaction was way down compared to usual for the same reason everyone's was, and also because outdoors it's harder to pipe the fake chants in and there was little in the way of chants for him during the show or match. 1 star. 9. Diamond Dallas Page, Paige Falkenberg, and Jay Leno beat Hulk Hogan, Terry Bollea, and Eric Bischoff in 14:34.
This match had good heat, but nothing special, and unlike last month, the audience didn't sleep through the match.
Leno got a good reaction, but not anywhere close to what you'd expect.
They threw a drink on Hogan and Bischoff.
Bischoff was noticeably heavier than at Starrcade to the point that he wouldn't take his shirt off.
Hogan and Page worked most of the way and did a good job, working tons stiffer than is usual for either.
Kevin Eubanks shoved Hogan, allowing Page to get a quick roll-up. Leno first tagged in at 4:30 and Bischoff ran away from him, which was really hard to take after the announcers had been building Bischoff up as a tournament karate fighter and Bischoff did all those videos during his silly McMahon feud.
Leno then tagged Page back in.
When Leno tagged in the next time, he grabbed an arm twist on Hogan. Hogan kicked Leno in the gut and he tagged out again. After Page and Leno delivered the worst double clothesline in wrestling history on Hogan, Leno was noticeably blown up. Eubanks hit Hogan with a chair. Bischoff threw a kick that missed Page, but Page still sold. But Page came back and Bischoff took a good bump. Bischoff threw nice-looking punches.
Disciple gave Hogan a foreign object and he hit Page a few times and did probably the best timed foot to the face he's done in years.
Page finally made the hot tag to Leno in 12:30. Bischoff begged off but did an eye rake, but Leno did a low blow, then threw 2 terrible-looking punches and was blown up again. Hogan accidentally punched Bischoff and Page clotheslined Hogan over the top to set up the finish. Eubanks gave the diamond cutter to Bischoff and Leno covered him. 1 1/4 stars. The show ended with a Travis Tritt concert that went more than the promised 30 minutes, although as promised. The show contained the normal 2:49 of wrestling and it wound up out being a 3:30 show.
Tritt's management held up WCW at the event for his money in advance, which actually was no big deal, a bonus of 3 motorcycles and a Learjet ride home, or it was threatened that he wouldn't perform.
There were many cable systems around the country that blacked out the Tritt concert due to communication breakdowns with viewers' choice, which was really out of control of WCW. We don't know what the general response nationally to this was, but Media One has already informed its consumers that they would be offering complete refunds to everyone who ordered the show, plus would offer the replay of the show for free again without the Tritt concert, because they didn't deliver the Tritt concert as advertised and were doing all this as a goodwill gesture to their consumers.
This is a pretty significant economic loss to WCW.
WCW has informed Media One that the main drawing point of the show was the Leno match and the Tritt concert wasn't realistically any kind of a draw and not to give refunds, and they wouldn't accept that decision, but since Media One has already informed its customers of its decision, it will almost surely not go back on it. The only buy rate reports we have at press time is that the show did very strong on the West Coast and disappointing in the Midwest. Leno showed footage of just about all his ring time on The Tonight Show on August 10th and told a number of Hogan old jokes during his monologue. A combination of a lackluster main event, a somewhat stale business, and a severely weakened national economy have been among the things blamed for New Japan drawing its smallest dome crowd in its history, an estimated 35,000 fans, on August 8th at the Osaka Dome. New Japan announced the crowd at 45,000 in what was said to be more of a face-saving measure, in a building that the company drew a sellout 53,000 in last year for its debut show in the building headlined by the second Naoya Ogawa vs. Shinya Hashimoto match. That was with a world judo champion having beaten a world wrestling champion via submission in his first match and then challenging for his wrestling title. This year's main event didn't have the drawing power as IWGP champion Tatsumi Fujinami in what will likely be the final world title defense of his career and possibly his last ever big show in the real spotlight, dropped the belt to Masahiro Chono in 1953 via submission to the STF.
The win began Chono's first reign with the IWGP belt. With only 20,000 tickets sold 1 week before the show, a lot of things were said, the biggest being that the crowd was down because it was not a lineup of the caliber expected for such a major show. The feeling was that it was a major arena lineup and not a dome lineup, although New Japan has gotten away with weaker lineups and drawn huge crowds many times previously at dome events. Osaka has always been a tough city for wrestling and all entertainment, as it lives in the shadow of Tokyo and there is something of an identity crisis when it feels it is getting a second-tier product. In addition, both due to the weakened economy and the proximity of this show to the G1, the feeling is that a lot of the Tokyo hardcores and fans in northern Japan that would travel to the major show didn't attend this one because G1 nights are by tradition better work rate shows and in this case shows with more story impact than this dome show figured to have. Whatever the reason, and all had validity, the work rate was said to be very good and we're told the card was better than it looked to be on paper. After the show, going with the current no respect theme throughout wrestling, for the record Chono copied this from the success of the NWO and WCW. Chono claimed that the belt was too heavy to carry around and that he wants to make a new title belt. He said that he is going to offer whomever wins the MVP award this year in the Japanese pro baseball and soccer leagues with membership into the NWO. He said that he would defend the title against NWO members, and not against foes from New Japan unless he gets more money for it. To continue on that theme, New Japan's next major show will be September 23rd at Yokohama Arena with 4 title matches will be headlined by 4 title matches, Chono defending against Scott Norton, Genichiro Tenryu and Shiro Koshinaka defending the IWGP Tag Team titles against NWO Sting and Bryan Adams, Jushin Liger defending the IWGP Junior title against Kaz Hayashi Shiryu, and Shinjiro Otani and Tatsuhito Takaiwa, who captured the IWGP Junior title in the tournament final on this show, making their first defense against Chris Jericho and Black Tiger, Eddie Guerrero. Also announced was a singles match with Shinya Hashimoto vs Keiji Muto and undercard matches with Yuji Nagata and Kensuke Sasaki vs Don Frye and Igor Mindert, a 6'8", 285-pound former Russian amateur wrestler, Kazuo Yamazaki and Osamu Kido vs Manabu Nakanishi and Satoshi Kojima, Tatsumi Fujinami and Osamu Nishimura vs Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Hiro Saito, Tadao Yasuda vs Michael Wallstreet and Takashi Iizuka vs Kazuyuki Fujita. It was also announced that Eric Bischoff would be attending the show. 1. Kendo Kashin and Tokumitsu Ishizawa beat El Samurai Osamu Matsuda in 10:13 with a flying armbar while Samurai was on the top rope. This was said to have been a real good opener.
2.
Nishimura and Yamazaki beat Yasuda and Iizuka, Takayuki Iizuka, in 11 minutes when Yamazaki beat Yasuda with an armbar submission, continuing the strong push for Yamazaki.
3. Koshinaka pinned Tenzan Kwang Kill Choi in 8:24 with a butt bump and a Japanese rolling crotch hold. We're told this match was disappointing. 4.
Kojima and Nakanishi beat Nagata and Fujita in 12:02. This was Nagata's first match back as a full-time regular after his WCW tour, and his reappearance was considered ahead of time the big thing about this match. Because of that, it turned into a disappointment as fans expected Nagata to have a new look and some new maneuvers or a new style, and instead not only was he the same Nagata who left, but he played a minor role in the match which focused more on Fujita, who had a new look. Nagata and Fujita may be put together as a tag team since both were national champion amateur wrestlers. Kojima ended up scoring the pin on Fujita after a brainbuster and a lariat. 5. Great Kabuki, Aki Samara and Great Muta, Keiji Muto, beat Tatsutoshi Goto and Michiyoshi Ohara in 10:33. With Kabuki retiring on September 7, he was brought in for a special match since the Great Muta gimmick was based on the successful Great Kabuki gimmick from many years earlier in Texas. Actually, another wrestler, Ray Urbano, used the ring name Great Kabuki in the same gimmick a decade earlier than Mara but never gained any prominence with it, so while Gary Hart came up with the gimmick for both Mara and Muto, he didn't come up with the gimmick originally. When Muta began doing the gimmick in WCW in 1989, he was billed as the son of Kabuki largely at Hart's insistence, although it was later dropped largely because nobody cared. Muta came out with red face paint and the word son on his face, basically to show that the Muta gimmick was the son of the Kabuki gimmick. Both men blew the red and green mist before the match. Goto and Ohara jumped them before the match.
The finish saw both men blow mist at Ohara when he tried to use a chair, and then both blew the mist at Goto, and Kabuki pinned Goto after a lariat. After the match, both men again blew both the red and green mist simultaneously. It was more of a spectacle than a match. 6. In a non-title match, Great Sasuke Masanori Murakawa pinned Liger Keiichi Yamada in 1511 when he reversed an attempted Liger bomb into a Hurricane Rana. Liger came into the match with a bad knee and Sasuke was all banged up as well. However, this match was said to have been better than expected and one of the best matches on the show, with Sasuke still doing a lot of flying moves. 7. Sasaki won via DQ from Fry in 9:06. The DQ finish on a big show is almost unheard of, but since Fry's role is to play ugly American heel for booing heat, the finish where he was caught in a submission by Sasaki but broke it with 2 low blows seemed to generate the same response. After the match, Nagata did a run-in attacking Fry to apparently set up a new feud. 8. Atani and Takaiwa became the first ever IWGP Junior Heavyweight Tag Team Champions, winning the tournament final over Koji Kanemoto and Dr. Wagner Jr., Miguel Gonzalez Jr., in 2013 when Atani pinned Kanemoto after a dragon suplex. From most reports, this match was the show stealer. After the match, Takaiwa was in the ring crying heavily since it was his first career title win. 9. Tenryu Genichiro Shimade retained his J1 Japanese heavyweight title, pinning Hashimoto in 1412 to avenge Hashimoto's win last week during the G1 tournament. This was said to be the stiffest match on the show, with both men trading hard chops and kicks, and also the most heated match on the card. Tenryu, at about 260 pounds and 48 years old, even did a tope. Since the J1 belt was the first title belt held by Rikidozen, both men traded really hard chops since that was the Rikidozen style in the 50s. In addition, the idea of Tenryu holding the belt has symbolism because both Tenryu and Rikidozen were top-notch sumo wrestlers before getting into pro wrestling. The finish of the match saw Tenryu deliver 4 Enzui Jiri before scoring the pin after a power bomb. 10. Chono beat Fujinami in 1953 to win the IWGP Heavyweight title. The match started slowly and cleanly until Hiro Saito tried to interfere and Fujinami cut him off. Most of the match saw both men exchange submissions on the mat, working on each other's arms and legs. As the match progressed, Fujinami used a figure 4 and Chono used his STF for near submission rope breaks. Chono finally won with a Yakuza kick and via submission with the STF. In what turned out to be a quiet departure for someone who at one point was considered one of the top stars in the business, Rick Martel retired from WCW citing a series of recent injuries to his knee and neck. Martel, 42, real name Richard Vigneault, had wrestled on and off for 25 years, starting out as a teenager in New Brunswick and going all over the world many times. Probably his career highlight would have been just as the 1984 wrestling war had gotten going, when Martel was close to signing with the WWF, and he was thought to be such a valuable commodity both as a worker in the AWA and as a drawing card in Quebec, that Vern Gagne promised him the AWA title to stay put. Gagne delivered on the promise, and on May 13, 1984 in St. Paul, Martel defeated Jumbo Tsuruta and held the title for nearly 20 months before dropping it to Stan Hansen on December 29, 1985 at the Meadowlands in New Jersey, when Giant Baba purchased the belt for Hansen for a few months. During that reign, Martel, who grew up idolizing Jack Briscoe and was actually a similar performer with the babyface looks and quiet personas to go along with being well-conditioned top-level athletes, had a memorable 36 minutes double count out in a title versus title match against NWA champion Ric Flair in October 1985 at the All Japan Anniversary Show at Tokyo Budokan Hall. Martel also held the WWF Tag Team title on 3 occasions, the first 2 with current WWF road agent Tony Garea. Martel and Garea beat Afa and Sika on November 8, 1980 in Philadelphia, and held the belts until March 17, 1981 when they lost to the Moondogs, Randy Cully and Sailor John White. They regained the belts on July 21, 1981 at the TV tapings in Allentown, Pennsylvania from the Moondogs, with White having been replaced by this time on the team by Larry Booker, before dropping the belts to Mr. Saito Masa Saito and Mr. Fuji on October 13, 1981 in Allentown. His final reign came after he lost the AWA title and went to WWF, originally with Tom Zenk as a tag team in line for a huge push as the Can-Am Connection. When Zenk quit, he was put together with Tito Santana as a team called Strike Force that just didn't quite catch on as well, although they got a big push. Martel and Santana beat Bret Hart and Jim Neidhart on October 27, 1987 in Syracuse, New York for the belts, and lost them on March 27, 1988 at WrestleMania in Atlantic City, New Jersey to Demolition, Bill Eadie and Barry Darsow.
Martel was well respected as an agile and well-conditioned babyface worker whose good looks were considered a draw but seemed to lack in the necessary charisma and interview ability to make the leap from major star to superstar despite having an AWA title reign at a time when winning a world title meant a lot in the business. He was a huge draw in his native Quebec both as a face and as a heel and was a pushed star virtually from the start of his career as a teenager because of his looks and athletic ability, working on top in such territories as Australia, New Zealand, where he first made a big name for himself working a program as a 21-year-old which included winning a non-title match over NWA champion Harley Race,
throughout Eastern Canada, Oregon, where he and Roddy Piper had a legendary feud with the Sheepherders, Japan, Hawaii and Georgia among other places, often as part of a babyface second from the top tag team. He also worked WWF as a singles heel starting in 1989 to feud with Santana after the breakup of the team, and eventually became the model building up to one of the worst matches ever at a WrestleMania in the 1991 version in a blindfold match against Jake Roberts, and he left the promotion after that loss.
When talking about Martel's physique, it would be remiss to not mention his familiarity with steroids. Martel was one of the wrestlers along with Roddy Piper, Brian Blair and Dan Spivey that Dr. George Zaharian in 1991 was convicted of illegally selling steroids to, and in trial testimony it came out that Martel's liver count was abnormal due to his steroid use.
Martel had left mainstream wrestling for several years before deciding to return due to the current boom period in January 1997. He had wrestled on Winnipeg Indies and some overseas tours with and against Don Callis, WWF Jackal, and later formed a tag team with him in Eastern Canada to tune up for a spot that they originally planned to start late last year in the WWF. However, after the two had reached an agreement to go to WWF and he had been sent a contract, before signing, Martel had second thoughts about the direction of the WWF and began talking with WCW as well.
Martel made the decision to go with a better money offer for a 2-year deal from WCW last September.
Callis, who was also offered a spot in WCW but not as a tag team with Martel, decided WWF would better fit his career since it's generally the better place to make a name, and the two split up amicably. Martel was brought in a few months later in incredible physical condition for his age and moving surprisingly well, but to little fanfare in a TV title program with Booker T and Perry Saturn which saw him capture the belt for a few weeks before blowing out his knee in February at the Super Brawl pay-per-view at the Cow Palace in the match against T. Although he could still work, he came across like a wrestler from another era, but wasn't pushed as a star and his style didn't get over either as a face or a heel to the new set of fans. He also suffered a concussion doing an angle, and on his first match back from the knee injury, was dropped on his head by Stevie Ray's flapjack injuring some vertebrae in his neck, the combination of which ultimately led to his decision as he didn't want to leave wrestling broken down and crippled and wasn't in the position of needing the money. Martel had privately told some friends several weeks back of his decision, and had informed J.J. Dillon, who coincidentally was Martel's opponent in his first pro match, that it didn't become known in wrestling until the end of July and wasn't public knowledge until this past weekend when Callis reported it in his column in the Winnipeg Sun.
The latest Japanese import on the American scene was the debut of K1, a Japanese kickboxing promotion spawned from both Seto Kaikon Karate and Rings Pro Wrestling in 1993 that has become the combat sport in Japan with network primetime coverage of its shows and is a phenomenal success in Switzerland, where the drawing power of Andy Hoke led to a Super Bowl-like 53.8 rating for a show this past June. After the debut on August 7th from the Mirage Hotel in Las Vegas and carried internationally on pay-per-view, a few conclusions can be drawn. K1, with its high knockout rate, said to be 87% on the broadcast, although that sounds like a worked figure to me because they used it to one-up announcer Roy Jones Jr.'s 86%, but the real figure could be 70%, can be a hit mainstream as it is easier for American fight fans to understand than UFC. However, as any study of pro wrestling, or any other new sport for that matter will show, it is the promotion of the event and getting the mainstream media behind the event that is far more important than if the event itself is exciting. The public pays for what it perceives and believes is important based on how it is presented to them. Hyping an event well will sell more tickets to a future show than presenting a kick-ass show. As mentioned here many times, and the most important thing to understand about K1's Japanese and Swiss success is not the quality of the fights, but the quality of the production of the show. In K1 it's like attending a rock show or a WWF or WCW mega event, with production values and pyro and glitz, all built around fights, not simply putting talented, or untalented, guys in a ring doing real or simulated fights. This show looked more like USA's Tuesday night fights with really good fights but no special big show atmosphere, special effects live, or cool video features to get personalities of the fighters over to the novice viewer that wouldn't know Andy Hoke if he walked down the street next to them.
Again, the most important thing long-term is the buy rate, early word on which doesn't look that promising, and more importantly, how well word gets around to the satisfied viewers of this show as to the date of the next event and ultimately the ability to hype the fighters as stars as UFC was able to do in its infancy. For example, when comparing new offshoot events, UFC opened at an 0.35 and steadily grew for a few years, peaking at a 1.1 before coming back down to steady 0.4s. ECW opened at 0.26, dipped a bit but has been basically staying steady. Pancrase opened at 0.25 and dropped off big time after the first show, which was similar to UWFI. EFC opened at 0.3 and fell to 0.15 to 0.2 before going out of business, and the other UFC offshoots opened week and never ran a second event. Clearly K1 and UFC, while entirely different sports, can be compared for many reasons. Art Davie, who brought Rorion Gracie's idea of UFC to Bob Merowitz and was matchmaker for UFC for several years, is now vice president of this endeavor. Bruce Beck and Don Wilson, two of the three announcers, along with Jeff Blatnick, who were synonymous to UFC events in its glory days, were doing the announcing on this show, and several of the production people from UFC, including longtime UFC director Michael Pillow, have jumped to this event. The opening dialogue by Beck was clearly an attempt to position this show as the next generation of events for beleaguered UFC fans who have had that sport devastated by politics, with the phrase "the fighting field and rules have changed forever."
Certainly Davie and K1 President Kazuyoshi Ishii are hoping for the same miracle that UFC enjoyed when it started, with strong buy rates despite little mainstream media hype, being ignored in the sports pages and almost no television exposure. The sport of K1 succeeded based on the majority of reaction. The question remains the promotion, which is a harder nut to crack. There didn't appear to be any mainstream buzz on this show.
But then again, UFC didn't start with much either, and with so many more homes getting pay-per-view than in 1993, you don't have to be as good to be successful.
An ECW level buy rate 5 years ago couldn't have survived, and today that level can be a solid success.
3 potential stars were created on the first show, 2 of which were Americans Curtis Schuster and Rick Rufus, the latter a kickboxing legend from another generation. The third and biggest star to come out of the show was K1's biggest star in the world, Hoke of Switzerland, who was mismatched with Michael Labrie, a 37-year-old former kickboxer who had never competed with leg kicks, allowing Hoke to spectacularly take him apart and come across like a real-life version of Jackie Chan or Jean-Claude Van Damme. The success or failure of K1 in this country will be if, like happened in Japan where K1 stars like Hoke and Mike Bernardo are on television commercials almost every time you blink, 1 year from now from the shows and videos, let those names become as recognizable as Ken Shamrock and Royce Gracie did after the first year of UFC. The show was a success as a live event, drawing approximately 4,250 fans to the 4,500-seat theater at the Mirage. The show aired live in Brazil and Japan on pay-per-view and on a 4-hour tape delay for an edited version in Japan on Fuji Network Television.
The event was sold out even though there were a few hundred empty seats and there were hundreds turned away since not everyone with a ticket showed up. Actual paid attendance and gate aren't available officially at press time. Davie claimed the comps were minimal and the gate was $312,000, which would be a tremendous beginning. The show was largely promoted in the Japanese media in California, particularly Southern California, and there had been a lot of hype for the event for months in martial arts publications. The crowd was heavily Japanese, although not the majority of the crowd. Mark Ratner of the Nevada State Athletic Commission said that they were delighted with how the show came off and said the crowd was very knowledgeable.
As far as the results went, Rufus captured the 8-man tournament via forfeit in the championship match when Schuster was unable to continue after his knee was torn up by low kicks in the semifinal by Jean-Claude Luer. That was one of the most spectacular matches of the year as Schuster rebounded from a torn meniscus in the second round and survived several more leg kicks to knock Luer out with a flurry of 9 straight big punches, not all of which landed at 2:34 of the round. The winner of the tournament was to earn a berth in the 16-man K1 Grand Prix World Tournament, which begins on September 27th at the Osaka Dome and ends on December 13th at the Tokyo Dome. After Rufus won the oversized check for $70,000, promoter Ishii announced that due to the courage Schuster showed, that he also would be invited to the tournament, although there is some question as to whether he can fully rehab his knee by September 27th. Rufus destroyed overmatched foes Pedro Fernandez in 1:15 of the second round with a knockout punch and Jerome Turkin in 58 of the second round with a hard right to reach the finals, and ultimately be declared the winner of the American Grand Prix tournament. Because 5 of the 6 tournament fights ended with quick knockouts and the championship match never took place, there was pay-per-view time for both super fights.
When the show began, only the tournament was hyped and neither Hoke vs. Labrie nor the main event, Ernesto Hoost vs. Maurice Smith, were announced to the television viewers, and no matches were ever advertised on the pay-per-view commercials. With time becoming an ally, they sent Hoke and Labrie out before the championship match, and had plenty of time after it was over for the main event. The idea that the arena main event doesn't air on the pay-per-view unless time allows seems to be a dinosaur approach to making it in this country. The announcing was good, as Beck is always good in his role. Wilson, doing his second K1, was more familiar with the product and is in his realm of expertise, and boxing superstar Jones Jr. did a lot better than most outside guests, such as UFC's original outsider football legend Jimmy Brown, brought in do. As for interviewer Stephen Quadros, as far as a connection to pro wrestling, there were interviews on the show with Boss Rutan, which provided the single most hilarious moment of the show, Ken Shamrock, and an in-ring appearance by Antonio Inoki giving a trophy to Hoke after his massacre of Labrie. Quadros of Kickboxing Ring Report handled interviews, and this was clearly not his forte. When interviewing Rutan, he curiously asked about Rutan's upcoming matches, which anyone on the inside must have started laughing about since his next big match is on the UFC pay-per-view show in October. Rutan mentioned his Pancrase match in September as a tune-up for his match in October, and Quadros, panic-stricken realizing his question had led into a plug for the opposition, pulled the mic away, and the interview ended abruptly at that point. Later, when interviewing Shamrock, Quadros said, "Ken, you're the man," as if it was a question, and Shamrock stood there dumbfounded waiting for Quadros to ask him something, and the result was the dreaded dead air. While they didn't ignore UFC and Smith's credentials, and it exaggerated Jean Riviere's credentials in extreme fighting to have captured the EFC championship when he simply won one match, it was clearly downplayed, and Frank Shamrock was never even acknowledged in Smith's corner. Inoki was played up rather big, talked about as being a pro wrestling legend in Japan and mentioned his political background as well, and they did talk about his draw against Muhammad Ali as being a legendary mixed martial arts match. There was no talk about future shows on pay-per-view, although there was plenty of hype for September 27th at Osaka Dome, and you were left with the idea of wanting to see how Rufus and Schuster do against the best in the world. Davey claimed the plan was to do a live pay-per-view from the Tokyo Dome on December 13th of the World Grand Prix Finals and return to the US with a pay-per-view from Las Vegas in February. When Ishii returned to Japan, he also spoke of a return date in Las Vegas in February. The show began, as it does traditionally in Japan, with all of the fighters in the tournament being announced in an opening ceremony. This really didn't work. First round results saw Rufus over Fernandez. Turkin beat Expedito da Silva of Brazil via unanimous decision, 30-28, 30-27 and 29-28. Luer knocked out Tomasz Kuszarzewski of Chicago with a kick to the knee at 2:59 of the first round, and Schuster beat 268-pound Jean Riviere. Riviere of Montreal, who has experience in numerous forms of fighting including MMA with Extreme Fighting, and even fought Vale Tudo in Brazil and was announced as a former EFC champion, which was an exaggerated credential as he never held a title with that group, although he did beat a 19-year-old Carlos Newton once in a singles match. That fight ended in 2:55 of the second round after a flurry. Rufus dispatched Turkin in one semifinal while Schuster knocked out Luer in the Big War. Hoke destroyed Labrie in 2:13 with a spectacular series of high and low kicks. The announcers noted Hoke's 22-7 record wouldn't sound impressive on a boxer, but noted that every one of his losses was later avenged, which isn't exactly true as he's never beaten Francisco Filho or avenged last year's loss to Ernesto Hoost yet, but the credential was repeated often anyway. In what I'd have to consider strange announcing, which largely showed a lack of communication from backstage to the announcers, during the Hoke match, they continued to bill Rufus versus Schuster for the title. It was clear seeing Schuster collapse after beating Luer that the odds of him coming back out were slim. When it was time for the final, he was limping badly and didn't have his gloves on, but did fight his way into the ring to forfeit in the ring. The main event saw Hoost beat Smith via an obvious unanimous decision, 50-46, 49-46 and 50-45. I'd have scored it 49-46. It was the only fight on the show the audience didn't like, as they booed after almost every round as neither man suffered significant damage. The reality of Smith, closing in on 37 with nearly 2 decades of competition, who clearly and unfortunately for him came along years ahead of his time, as far as his caliber on the world-class kickboxing scene was too evident in this fight. Smith mainly tied Hoost up and was good enough defensively to avoid taking any serious damage, but Hoost, who was probably the best heavyweight in the world, was much quicker and had more explosiveness. Smith's defensive ability enabled him to last the distance, but in doing so it was a dull spectator fight. USA Today ran a front page of the Life section story on pro wrestling on August 6,
complete with photos and a capsule profile on Bill Goldberg and Steve Austin. Goldberg was quoted as saying of Austin, "I respect the guy for what he's done, but I don't respect him enough to copy him." Steve Austin is known as one of the best promo guys in the world, but Steve Austin doesn't do one thing that I can do in the ring. Austin on Goldberg. Goldberg is squashing people with his power moves, and that's great. But he doesn't know the psychology yet. I'm able to go out there and take the fans on a 30-minute roller coaster ride. The story, even though inspired by WCW's Leno match, was heavily WWF-oriented, leading off with scenes from WWF television shows and proclaiming the Springer and Stern-like stuff as pro wrestling of the 90s. It listed a $650 figure as the merchandise generated by the two companies, which is exaggerated to the point of being laughable. McMahon was quoted as saying about the Monday ratings war, "It's the same old Hulk Hogan situation. Every time Hogan is on the air, we clobber them. It's a tired, old situation." Of course, quarter-hour breakdowns, with Hogan being near the top of the list of wrestlers that move rating in a positive direction, tell a completely different story, but McMahon has never let the truth get in the way of a good quote. Not to be outdone, Hogan claimed he's thought about retiring due to back and knee problems, but my wife doesn't want me to quit. My kids don't want me to quit. The promoters don't want me to quit. The fans don't want me to quit, and the IRS really doesn't want me to quit, and said that he loves what he's doing. As usual, the story was filled with basic wrong facts. It claimed WCW put Nitro up head-to-head with Raw about 1 year ago, actually 3. It claimed the ratings are close but that Raw generally has won since this TV season began. Since the TV season began in September, that was completely erroneous. Even though Raw has been ahead over the past 3 months, it lost every head-to-head week from June 10, 1996 through April 6, 1998. It claimed that the fans aren't just males 18 to 34 anymore, when in fact, the demographics are more strongly in that age group now than they were before the WWF went in this direction, when the overall audience was smaller but more broad-based demographically. Although it wasn't well written in the article to explain what the quote was, Goldberg did knock WWF, saying, "It's the worst example you can set for youth. The business has evolved, you can't deny that. But our show is a family show." Bonnie Hammer, senior VP of USA Network, defended the current WWF product, saying it was no more violent than any primetime series. While there are more violent shows, that statement is an obvious crock when you say WWF or even WCW is no more violent than any primetime series. Any of the cop shows, look at NYPD Blue, they're far more violent. Yeah, there's some sexual innuendo. It's fun though, it's humor. Am I going to have my 4-year-old watch it? No. But my husband grew up watching it, and he wound up in Harvard Divinity School. The story also had a sidebar about the McMahon/Turner rivalry, positioning the history and storyline based on the revisionist history of McMahon. The claim, laughable to anyone who knows history, is that McMahon's WWF was the only game in town in the 80s, and McMahon provided wrestling shows for Turner, which he did for a 1-year period in 1984 to 85. Then McMahon claimed Turner wanted a bigger piece of the pie. McMahon said no, and the two sides parted company. While it is true that Turner was interested in getting into the wrestling business at that time and even reached an agreement with Bill Watts, which ended up never going anywhere, presumably after being turned down by McMahon, the reason the two sides parted company was over the fact Turner's wrestling ratings on TBS were dropping with McMahon's programming. In 1985, when Turner put Watts on for a 13-week run in a time slot without a wrestling tradition behind it, it took only a few weeks before the Watts tapes were beating both McMahon's tapes in the traditional Saturday and Sunday slots. Turner wanted shows taped in his studio in Atlanta, as they were years earlier as Georgia Championship Wrestling, the company McMahon bought out to get the TBS time slot in 1984. Drew much higher ratings than McMahon's shows were drawing. It wound up with Crockett buying the rights to the TBS time slot from McMahon for $1 million in 1985. As the USA Today story goes, next thing McMahon recalls is that Turner called up saying, "Vince, I'm in the wrestling business," and Vince replied, "Fine, Ted, I'm in the entertainment business." Whether that repartee ever took place like that is questionable, but the period between McMahon and Turner parting ways and Turner buying Jim Crockett Promotions was 3.5 years, and Turner and Crockett were negotiating for the company for nearly 1 full year, which was well known to everyone in the industry before the deal was consummated. So it's hardly like one day out of the blue McMahon found out Turner owned a wrestling company and was his competition. McMahon then claimed Turner opened his checkbook and bought all of his top talent, not mentioning that was the exact same way McMahon bought his way to prominence in the business a decade earlier. The key to this story, and the most important point, is that McMahon has proven to be far superior to Bischoff when it comes to dealing with the mainstream media in every major story during this boom period. Whenever you read these stories, you can tell McMahon has charmed the writers, who unknowingly believe his version of the truth because he comes across as more personable than the cocky Bischoff. That allows his to stretch his version of the truth and at times outright lie.
Those same writers generally, you can tell, don't take what Bischoff says seriously because of his obvious public disdainment for McMahon and refusal to give him credit for anything. McMahon, by contrast, won't give Bischoff his due credit for sparking this wrestling boom period, and his general weakness at being fake sincere.
So WCW gets shortchanged when it comes to its success over the past 2 years.
Certainly the people doing this piece clearly fell into that category, even if Bischoff is generally the more honest of the two when it comes to facts. Not that I'd categorize Bischoff as the world's most honest wrestling promoter, but he certainly doesn't make stories up to the same degree.
A key example is the Canadian talk show Off the Record.
On that show, McMahon was backed into the corner by the host and basically forced to admit he lied in the Hart story, and then Bischoff came on and, using facts, contradicted numerous other McMahon's falsehoods from his previous appearance when it came to the business rivalry between the two sides.
Still, even though Bischoff made a major tactical mistake on the air, such as knocking Austin as someone who would be a mid-card guy in his company, his facts were more accurate and his portrayals overall were a lot more honest. Yet, I can tell you that the host still respected McMahon far more when it was over, believing McMahon's success was because of his brain and Bischoff's was because of access to a supposed unlimited amount of money. And which promotion has dominated coverage on that show since those interviews? Based on recent patterns, there were two things that seemed like safe bets when it came to Monday Night Wrestling.
Raw would be the better show, and it would win the ratings. Neither happened, and while from this vantage point Nitro was the better show, with WCW putting on its best TV in several weeks and WWF having its weakest Raw and even longer, that still doesn't explain Nitro squeaking by with a win in a business based on long-term patterns, such as television ratings.
So you can come up with your own explanation.
Whether it was because Nitro presented far more wrestling, and a lot of good wrestling, something it did to beat Raw in the first place and has lost sight of while losing over the past 3 months, or some sort of residual from Jay Leno, although that makes no sense because Leno meant nothing to the ratings the previous weeks during the hype phase. The bottom line saw Nitro scored a 4.70 rating, 4.74 first hour, 4.62 seconds hour, 4.73 third hour, and 7.69 share to Raw's 4.55 rating, 4.26 first hour, 4.84 seconds hour, and 7.38 share.
Over the 2 hours head-to-head, the Nitro average was a 4.65, winning by basically 1/10 of a point. The Nitro replay did a 1.6 rating and 9.2 share. If you're comparing Bill Goldberg with Steve Austin, a comparison that Austin has dominated in recent weeks, the overrun segment on WCW with the Goldberg vs. Meng match did a 5.89 rating, while the overrun featuring the end of the Four Corners tag title match with Austin did a 5.22. However, Raw did win the final quarter handily with intros and first 10 minutes of the Four Corners doing a 5.23, while WCW did a 4.71 for its tag title match with Hall and Giant vs. Sting and Nash. For those who play this game, even though the Raw win streak ended, and it didn't take giving away a pay-per-view bonanza to do so this time, but simply came from presenting its strengths with its potentially, although it hasn't been the case lately, superior in-ring product, there was still a lot of cause for celebration for the WWF, as the second edition of Sunday Night Heat the previous night drew a 4.25 rating and a whopping 8.3 share. Not only that, but the episode of Pacific Blue that followed, with a much-hyped appearance of Hunter Hearst Helmsley, held up with a 4.0 rating, exactly double what the show did before it had the pro wrestling lead-in and tie-in. With numbers like that, expect more WWF talent on Pac Blue and other USA Network shows, not to mention the probability of WWF getting a second primetime show after the 5-week planned run of Sunday Night Heat ends on August 30th. In the quarter-hour head-to-head comparisons, Raw started with a 4.2, McMahon, Mankind, Kane, Undertaker, and Bearer interview/Angle, 4.1, Hogan and Bischoff interview beginning of Ray vs. Jericho. Nitro then did a 4.5, finish of Ray vs. Jericho, Bischoff interview regarding Leno match, beginning of Mexican three-way, to 4.1, Luna vs. Jackie. Nitro did a 4.7, Mexican three-way, to 4.0, Drozdov vs. Vega brawl. Nitro grew to a 5.1, Hart vs. Luger, while Raw grew to a 4.8, LOD Southern Justice Angle plus DX interview. Raw then won the next quarter with a 4.8, Austin interview Godfather Bart Gun Vader Angle to Nitro's 4.6, Guerrero vs. Kidman. Raw did a 4.7, Venus/Bobbitt interview, beginning of Bradshaw vs. Mero to Nitro's 4.5, Raven vs. Boulder. Nitro did a 4.8, Hennig vs. Conan to Raw's 4.5, Bradshaw vs. Mero finish, Undertaker interview, Shamrock attacks Owen Hart, and the final quarter with Raw 5.2 to 4.7.
Manami Toyota captured this year's 14th annual All Japan Women Annual Grand Prix Tournament, wrestling more than 44 minutes on the final show on August 9 at Tokyo Korakuen Hall, becoming the first woman in the history of Japanese wrestling to capture the tournament 3 times.
With interest in the promotion at a low point over the past 2 decades, the final 2 nights of the tournament, with the score kept close, still drew only an estimated 900 fans to Korakuen Hall on August 8 and about 1,300 for the championship match, which saw Toyota beat Zap-I, Kaoru Ito, in 23:47 when Zap-T accidentally hit her partner with a kendo stick after Toyota moved, and Toyota got the pin with a bridging back suplex.
On August 8, the finals of the juniors tournament, the winner of whom would advance to the Final Four of the big tournament the next day, took place. In the junior league going into the final day, Nani Takahashi, Momoe Nakanishi and Miho Uekazawa were all tied with 11 points and Emi Motokawa had 10 points. Motokawa beat Takahashi and Nakanishi went to a 30-minute draw with Uekazawa, which wound up with Motokawa, Nakanishi and Uekazawa all tied, and they had a series of singles matches that would continue until one of the women scored a pin on both of the other 2 in a row. Motokawa first pinned Uekazawa, but lost to Nakanishi. Uekazawa then kept it alive, beating Nakanishi, and then beat Motokawa with a fisherman suplex to join Toyota, Zap-I and Yumiko Hata in the Final Four. In the semifinals on August 9, Zap-I, Kaoru Ito, pinned Uekazawa in 13:26 with her double foot stomp finish, while Toyota pinned Hata in 20:31 by turning an armbar submission into a jackknife cradle.
The winner of the tournament by tradition gets a shot at the WWWA title at the WrestleMarinepiad show later in the year. Toyota's winning was a surprise since she was set to challenge for the title held by LLPW's Shinobu Kondori already on August 23 in Kawasaki, and is expected to win it for the 3rd time, joining only Aiko Kyo, early 70s, Jumbo Miyamoto, mid-70s, and Jackie Sato, late 70s, as 3-time champions. You'd think this tournament should have been used to create a logical contender for Toyota for later in the year. After being in the developmental stages for more than 1 year, the International Wrestling Institute and Museum, a building designed largely for amateur wrestling but which will have an area devoted to pro wrestling, is scheduled to open on September 19 in Newton, Iowa. The museum was the brainchild of Mike Chapman, a leading amateur wrestling writer-historian, with a lot of input from Lou Thez. Although called international, the museum is largely based on the history of wrestling in the United States. Among the items that will be on display are the actual wrestling shoes that Frank Gotch wore in his 1911 match with George Hockenschmidt, and a copy of the oldest known pro wrestling tape believed to exist of a 1920 match in Madison Square Garden between Earl Caddick and Joe Stecher before 14,000 fans in Madison Square Garden, which actually looks more like an amateur match of today than a pro match by today's standards, even though pro wrestling was worked by that point in time. Thez, Vern Gagne, and Danny Hodge will all be at the 2-day grand opening on September 19 and September 20. Thez will largely be responsible for the pro wrestling area, which will focus on pro wrestlers who had legitimate top-notch wrestling ability. On a related note, next week's issue will be our 3rd annual Hall of Fame issue. This year we've made a change as we sent out ballots to a number of major names both within the industry, including top wrestlers and front office personnel from around the world, along with many top reporters with a historical and international background. So from this point forward, my personal input as to who does and doesn't make it will be minimal and no more than dozens of others. We'll have the new entrants next week along with a complete breakdown of the balloting, and I'll also list my own picks. Japanese television rundown.
July Michinoku.
1. In a match from June 14, Super Delphin and Gran Hamada beat Tiger Mask and Gran Naniwa in 1748. Tiger Mask, who is doing some shooting of late, wearing his mask no less, did some nice roll-throughs into knee bars and ankle locks. The match had a nice build, but the work itself wasn't all that good in spots and there wasn't much heat. Finish saw Delphin pin Naniwa with a German suplex. 2.5 stars. 2. From June 21st, Sasuke the Great and Masked Tiger beat Tiger Mask and Muhammad Yone in 1741. Bad match, and it went long, which made it worse. Masao Orihara and Takeshi Ono play the heel Sasuke and Tiger to feud with Great Sasuke and Tiger Mask. The idea is a sound one, they just picked the wrong performers, as both are bad and Tiger is really bad. The fact Yone is a Battler's trained shoot style guy tells you what you need to know about him working in a lucha libre style promotion. About the only highlight was tying Tiger Mask's mask to the ropes and the heels kicking the hell out of him. Sasuke pinned Yone with a Dr. Bomb.
After the match, Tiger Mask pulled the mask off both men, but they escaped with towels over their head to protect their identity.
1/2 of 1 star. 3. From June 28, Amada and Jinsei Shinzaki beat Masato Yakashiji and Masaaki Mochizuki in 11:55.
Yakashiji is a hell of a worker and does a lot of Rey Mysterio Jr. spots.
It was still pretty amazing to see how good Hamada works at age 47. Hamada really made Mochizuki look good, which is quite a talent. Even Shinzaki looked good here. Shinzaki pinned Mochizuki after a dragon screw and a power bomb. 3 stars. 4. From June 21st, Naohiro Hoshikawa pinned Yakashiji in 20:46. This was a weird match that's hard to rate.
There were spots that were excellent and at times nothing was happening.
The basic problem is that while both are good workers, they were out there way too long and it showed.
When the two got tired, their spots got sloppy, particularly in the latter stages of the match, although they picked things up and saved the match with a great finishing sequence. Yakashiji did a baseball slide into a swinging DDT on the floor, which is a great idea but it didn't look good. The match picked up at the end as they did some super near falls and lots of reverses into near falls before Hoshikawa got the pin with an Enzui-Jiri off the top rope.
3¼ stars. 5. From June 28, Delphin pinned Hoshikawa in 23:03.
This was totally different from the previous match. While Yakashiji is a much better worker when it comes to execution and moves than Delphin is more experienced when it comes to singles and doing long matches, so he was able to carry the long match whereas Yakashiji wasn't.
This was a fantastic match due to Delphin's pacing and knowing how to build it.
All kinds of great near falls and great moves all built around DDTs.
Hoshikawa blocked the swinging DDT and turned it into a Northern Lights suplex for a great spot. He did his Enzui-Jiri off the top but Delphin got his foot on the ropes. He did another Enzui-Jiri off the top but Delphin kicked out.
If anything, Hoshikawa kicked out of too many near falls to where it almost got old, particularly with so many of them being offshoots of the DDT.
Finally, Delphin caught Hoshikawa coming off the ropes with his 5th DDT of the finishing sequence for the pin. 4¼ stars. August 1st, New Japan. 1.
Jushin Liger retained the IWGP Junior title pinning Koji Kanemoto in 28:27. The last 12 minutes aired and it was about as good as you'd figure.
Kanemoto was hyperextending Liger's knees on the apron and went for an Achilles tendon submission. After his overhead belly-to-belly, Liger surprised Kanemoto with a drop kick to the knee and used a running Liger bomb for a near fall. Kanemoto later blocked Liger's Kopo kick and turned it into an ankle lock which looked like the finish due to the super slow and dramatic rope break. After a Frankensteiner off the top, Kanemoto missed a moonsault and Liger went for a figure 4, but Kanemoto quickly reversed it and Liger again had to make the ropes. Liger German suplexed Kanemoto on his head and used a super fisherman buster for a great near fall. After delivering a tombstone, Liger missed on the headbutt off the top rope. Kanemoto came back with a spinning kick to the head and a tiger suplex but Liger got his foot on the ropes. Kanemoto got a near fall with a moonsault. As he went to the top again, Liger caught him with a brainbuster off the top but Kanemoto got up. The two traded simultaneous palm blows, before Kanemoto decked Liger with a palm blow. As he came running toward him, Liger clocked him with a palm blow for the pin. Inside the ring, Kanemoto is the best worker in this business this year. 4½ stars. 2. Kensuke Sasaki and Kazuo Yamazaki beat Don Fry and Brian Johnston in 8:39. The entire story of the match was how Fry wouldn't face Sasaki. Every time Sasaki tagged in, Fry tagged out. Sasaki and Yamazaki did a good job of carrying the match in the ring. Fry's personality can carry it outside the ring but he's limited in the ring. Johnston was carried okay, although he looked bad in one spot where he did some sort of a messed up kick. Finally, Sasaki hit Johnston with a lariat to the back of the head, followed by another lariat, and got the submission with the power strangle. There was a big pull apart after the match with Sasaki and Fry to build to their Osaka Dome match. 1¼ stars. 3. Genichiro Tenryu and Shiro Koshinaka won the IWGP Tag titles from Masahiro Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan in 25:10. The last 12 minutes aired. Chono, Tenzan and Koshinaka did a good job, but it was back to reality for Tenryu who showed his age and even screwed up in spots. Since Koshinaka worked most of the way, it was a damn good match although couldn't hold a candle to their match 1 month earlier. At one point with Chono down, Tenryu bounced off the ropes 5 times before dropping an elbow, almost like a Rocky People's elbow spot, but in the midst of a serious match, the spot was completely out of context and totally killed the crowd, and him doing a bad lariat didn't help matters any. The match really built well, particularly after Chono kicked out twice after Tenryu dropped an elbow off the top and also after a power bomb. Tenryu delivered a lariat, which may have been the finish, but Chono wasn't ready for it and didn't sell it, and everyone saw it. Tenryu delivered a few more lariats and got the pin, but the messed up spot killed the finish. 3¼ stars. Puerto Rico.
Channel 4 in San Juan ran a news story on July 28 on the history of wrestling in Puerto Rico built around the 25th anniversary show of the WWC promotion on August 1. The piece also paid tribute to wrestlers who were stars with the company that had since passed away, listing Eddie Gilbert, Murdoch, Junkyard Dog, Andre the Giant, Kareem Muhammad, Ray Canty, and Rufus Jones. There was no mention in the piece of Bruiser Brody, which is mind-boggling on so many levels since the story of Brody's death had to be the biggest story with the most impact in the history of wrestling in this part of the world. Of all the names mentioned in that piece, Brody was a bigger name by far than all of them in Puerto Rico except perhaps Andre, and he appeared far more frequently as a headliner and drew bigger crowds in Puerto Rico than even Andre.
To this day, the business in Puerto Rico and the reputation of the WWC office never fully recovered. Mexico.
Scorpio Jr. won the Silver Legends Mask Tournament on July 31 at Arena Mexico, beating El Hijo del Santo via countout when Santo missed a tope and crashed on the floor and was stretchered out. No doubt the humiliation of losing in the tournament named after his father will lead to Santo agreeing to put up his mask for a mask versus mask rematch, which is set for the EMLL 65th anniversary show on September 18.
Pierroth Jr. reportedly earned a $50,000 payout for losing his mask on July 20 in Nuevo Laredo in the match against La Parca.
Pierroth Jr. is no longer wearing the mask in Mexico, but did work with his trademark mask during his tour of Puerto Rico.
In addition, it is said that some of the undercard wrestlers had, in early 1900s American-like fashion, gone around town and gotten people to bet on Pierroth winning, and both Pierroth and Parca were cut in on the action and each received approximately $15,000 more out of all that, between that and each being given 100 tickets for their friends to scalp in front of the building.
If those figures are accurate, and it may have been the record date for Mexico because ticket prices were so high, it would be the biggest payoff I've ever heard of in Mexico. Big masks in the past have gone in the $20,000 to $30,000 range.
That's probably why a lot of the WCW wrestlers are so upset as WCW trivializing their losing their masks.
Pierroth Jr. was unmasked as Norberto Salgado Salcedo, age 40, and has been a pro for 15 years.
Originally from Cuernavaca, he began using the Pierroth Jr. name as a babyface clown in 1987, named after a Mexican clown called Pierroth, as there was never a wrestler called Pierroth previously. He became a national star in 1988 when he beat Halcón 78 to win the Mexican national light heavyweight title and is known in Mexico as being arguably the best of all the wrestlers on the mic. Oro Jr., who dropped his mask on July 26, was revealed as the 29-year-old brother of the late Oro. That he debuted in 1989 and is now wrestling as Mickey Segura even though his real name is Miguel Angel. Mr. Aguila, who is already wrestling without a mask in the WWF, is being built up for a mask versus mask match with Ultimo Guerrero, and EMLL is also gearing up for a Tony Rivera versus Guerrero de la Muerte hair match. It appears that the finish of the mask tournament on July 18 that drew 21,000 changed.
Apparently El Hijo del Espectro was supposed to lose his mask.
Espectro, who is the nephew of Antonio Pena, then no-showed the event and jumped to AAA, so they contacted Guerrero del Futuro, who hadn't been around in a long time, and got him to lose his mask. Apparently there was major controversy as on the pay-per-view broadcast. This was the first pay-per-view wrestling show ever in Mexico by a Mexican promotion, as some of the WWF events had aired on pay-per-view in Mexico in the past. When Santo beat Guerrero del Futuro with the Caballo Camel Clutch, the announcer said it was the old made famous by Rito Romero.
In fact, the hold was made famous originally by Gory Guerrero and El Santo. Guerrero invented it, but it became Santo's finisher when the two were the most famous tag team ever in Mexico, and Romero never used it, and all the magazines heavily ripped the announcing because of that.
All Japan. Almost nothing new from this group, which starts back up on August 22nd. Gedo and Jado will work 3 dates on the tour, including Budokan Hall, while Super Delphin and Grand Naniwa have 5 dates on the tour, but won't be doing the Budokan show.
The July 26th TV show, which was the Akiyama vs. Kobashi match, did a 3.4 rating.
New Japan. Aside from the Yokohama Arena matches being announced and the Osaka Dome show, The only other major news from the past week was the announcement of the 8 teams in the lackluster tournament, where the winner will travel to the US and get a title shot at the WCW Tag Team Champions later in the year on Nitro. The teams entered in the tournament, which runs from September 14th to September 20th, will be Genichiro Tenryu and Shiro Koshinaka, Hiro Saito, and Keiji Muto, Yuji Nagata, and Kensuke Sasaki, Scott Norton, and Michael Wallstreet, Shinya Hashimoto, and Kazuo Yamazaki, Satoshi Kojima, and Manabu Nakanishi, Masahiro Chono, and Hiroyoshi Tenzan, and Bryan Adams, and NWO Sting. I'm not sure of this, but believe it'll be a deal where the first 4 teams and the last 4 are in separate round-robin brackets, where they'll have one match against the other 3 teams in their bracket. The teams with the best one-loss record from each bracket go to the final on September 20th. Jushin Liger will defend the IWGP Junior title against Great Sasuke on September 10th in Omiya. The October tour is called the NWO Typhoon Tour, billed as a tour run by Chono and the NWO. They did this last year as well. Biggest show is October 18th in Kobe. July 25th TV did a 2.6 rating. Other Japan notes. FMW ran the big battle for ownership of the promotion angle on August 11th at Korakuen Hall before a legit sellout of 2,150 as Atsushi Onita returned to the FMW side, teaming with Mr. Pogo and Yoshinori Sasaki and FMW owner Shuichi Arai to beat Hiromichi Fuyuki and Yukihiro Kanemura and Koji Nakagawa and manager Go Ito when Onita used the power bomb on Ito and Arai pinned him in 1550. If Arai's team would have lost the match, then Fuyuki would take over as new owner of FMW. Hideki Hasaka, who lost a loser must retire match, which of course means nothing in a promotion that has them regularly and then uses gimmicks, beat Tetsuhiro Kuroda to allow him to return to FMW. Onita will appear as a full-timer with FMW starting the next tour. Onita hasn't worked full-time since his first retirement match on May 5, 1995. The complete card for the Women's Memorial All-Star Show, featuring mainly the stars of 1980s All Japan Women on August 14th in Kawasaki, will be Jaguar Yokota vs. Asia Kong, Kaneko Nagatomo vs. Condor Saito, Dump Matsumoto and Crane Yu vs. Combat Toyota and Hypercat, Yumi Ogura, with Shiro Abe as referee. Shiro Abe was the heel ref famous in the 80s in the Chigusa Nagio vs. Dump Matsumoto Wars, Chumbo Hori and Yukari Omori vs. the original Jumping Bomb Angels, Itsuki Yamazaki and Norio Tadano, plus a Battle Royal, involving everyone else not listed. All the matches besides the Battle Royal will have 10 minutes time limits. The card will also feature in-ring interviews with the top stars taking questions from the crowd, and several of them in concert and musical concerts were a big part of the AJW promotion in the 80s. Apparently Takashi Matsunaga, who heads AJW, is really mad because he had the idea of doing a similar show, and Omori and Matsumoto, who put the show together, didn't ask him or involve him or his company in this, which I guess tells you about the relations between the office and its former stars. Hayabusa will be doing a Great Muta version of his gimmick, playing heel as Darkside Hayabusa on the next FMW pay-per-view show. Big Japan ended its tournament to crown its first deathmatch heavyweight champion on August 9th in Kawasaki, with Great Pogo winning over Mitsuhiro Matsunaga in a glass and fire deathmatch. After the match, Pogo challenged former rival Atsushi Onita to come to Big Japan and challenge for the title. There will be a rematch between Pogo and Matsunaga for the title on August 23rd in Osaka. On the same show, Shoji Nakamaki and Ryuji Yamakawa won the Big Japan tag titles from Shadow WX, Satoru Shiga, and Shadow Winger. Takashi Okano Terry Funk will be appearing from September 2nd to September 7th for the IWA promotion for the Great Kabuki Retirement Tour. The other foreigners on that tour will be Booker Doug Gilbert and Leatherface Rick Patterson. They are holding a tournament with the first round on September 2nd and the semifinals and finals on September 4th at Yokohama Bunka Gym, with Keizo Matsuda, Ruji Sato, Shigeo Okamura, Tudor the Turtle, Great Takeru, Akinori Tsukioka, Katsumi Hirano and Keisuke Yamada, with the winner of the tournament facing Kabuki on September 7th at Korakuen Hall in Kabuki's retirement match. Jushin Liger will be working the August 22nd Michinoku show facing Naohiro Hoshikawa. MPW also has a big show on August 23rd in Sendai with Great Sasuke vs. Super Delphin and NG Hammer vs. Convict No. 1. 17-year-old Ayako Hamada became the second daughter of Gran Hamada to start wrestling, starting out in the main event on August 9th at Korakuen Hall for Asian, losing to Candy Akutsu. It was talked about doing 6-person mixed tags with Hamada and his 2 daughters, and also mixed tags with Hamada and 1 daughter against either Satoru Sayama or the current Tiger Mask, teaming with Akutsu, who will be wrestling soon as the first women's Tiger Mask, or perhaps in a father and son tag team against former wrestler Animal Hamaguchi and his daughter Kyoko.
the world champion freestyle wrestler.
Here and there. Lost in much of the reports on the death of Hall of Fame baseball announcer Jack Brickhouse last week at the age of 82 was his connection to pro wrestling.
Brickhouse was the announcer for Primetime Network Pro Wrestling based out of Chicago in the 1950s. Not that many years back, when WCW had a run on WGN in Chicago and produced a show called WCW Chicago, the shows would feature a segment every week with Brickhouse reminiscing about 50s wrestling. Brickhouse was always defensive of his association with pro wrestling and was famous for the line, "We used to say there were two kinds of people. Those who watched wrestling on television, and those who watched but didn't admit it." It appears after rumors of this happening for nearly a decade, that Stampede Wrestling will restart in September under Bruce Hart and produce weekly television with good time slots in both Calgary and Edmonton. Longtime announcer and producer Ed Whalen won't be involved, which means Hart will be allowed to do angles. This isn't the reason Stampede closed down at the end of 1989, but Whalen, an arch-conservative who was a well-known TV and radio personality, had his own feelings about pro wrestling, and if he didn't like an angle, would frequently edit it from the show. In hindsight, it's hilarious, although it was pretty mind-boggling at the time. For example, when they did the big split of Dynamite Kid and Davey Boy Smith, Whalen loved the two as a tag team and hated the angle, so the angle never aired, and since their grudge matches were generally pretty wild, he generally didn't allow them to air either. Another time Bruce brought in a heel manager as a heel member of the Hart family, a supposed first cousin, the son of Stu's brother Lou Hart, and Whalen the first weekend on commentary killed the angle, saying that Stu doesn't have a brother named Lou. Or there was the story in the early 70s when Whalen marked out when Abdullah the Butcher was destroying someone and clocked Butcher as a shoot 6 times in the head with a hammer. Boy, did that kill Butcher's gimmick and heat, and he left the territory immediately. I'm assuming Hart will build the company around local wrestlers he and his brothers have trained over the past few years. There was a genuine riot at a CWF show on August 7th in Chalmette, Louisiana, a New Orleans suburb. The main event featured Road Dogg Jesse Jam and brother Scott Armstrong versus One Man Gang and Bunkhouse Buck, but the problem took place in the previous match, a 3-way dance with Stevie Richards, Corporal Punishment, and Joe Kane. A fan threw a chair and hit Richards. Punishment hopped the rail to get to the fan but was attacked by other fans. Then many fans started fighting each other. One fan got to the ring, and by this point the wrestlers and come from the back, and Scott Armstrong clobbered a fan. It wound up with 30 arrests and members of the local SWAT team showing up at the building to calm things down, and at least one fan was hospitalized after being hit with a chair by another fan. One of the wrestlers suffered a broken hand as well. August 8th Memphis television show saw the program open with Randy Hales and the Heels attempting to kidnap Stacy and take her for a ride in his car, but Jerry Lawler and Brian Christopher made the save. Christopher wound up brawling into the ring with Tony Falk and beat him in a match, but all the Heels then jumped Christopher until Lawler made the save with a baseball bat. Announcer Dave Brown returned from vacation and said that he was unhappy being in the middle of the problem, saying that he has been longtime friends with both Hales and Lawler. Hales came out and said that Lawler committed assault with a deadly weapon with the bat and should be arrested. He said that Lawler had brainwashed everyone in Memphis and was trying to make him out to be the heel in the feud, using the heel word. He then said he was canceling the scheduled TV main event of Lawler and Stacy versus Hales and Billy Travis and instead putting Lawler in a handicap match against 4 heels. Brown then said it would be the original main event because he was protecting Channel 5. Brown has been the weatherman at the station for more than 2 decades, and said that unlike other wrestling shows, TV5, which had pushed the match for 1 week, doesn't advertise a match and then not deliver it unless there is an injury or someone doesn't appear. And Brown said all 4 were there, so they were having the match. Hales got mad at Brown, but Brown said that he was doing this to protect Hales from getting heat and losing his television outlet. The highlight of the main event saw Stacy rip Hales' clothes off and he was left in his boxers again. Colorado Kid was given the same NWA North American belt that Jeff Jarrett wore briefly in the WWF on August 5th at the Music City TV tapings to represent that Kid's Music City North American title is the official NWA North American title. The biggest angle at the taping is the heel owner Bill Behrens brought out Brickhouse Brown, who was banned for life from Music City by Burt Prentice, and said that he had signed him to the heel group MCW Georgia. Carolina Indies Chris Hamrick and Dr. Feelgood apparently tore down the place at the taping. Bill Dundee will be working 3 dates for this group next week. Music City is now running shows every Monday at the Mix Factory, a nightclub in Louisville, where they air Raw is War for 2 hours on the big screens and follow it with a live MCW show. Martin Moran is running Lucha Libre shows on August 28th in Stockton, California at the Civic, August 29th in Fresno, California, and August 30th in Anaheim using Leo Del Santo, Vampiro Canadiense, Pirata Morgan, Blue Panther, Dr. Wagner Jr., and Misterioso. Tommy Firo on August 18th in Wildwood, New Jersey has Val Venus vs. Al Snow, King Kong Bundy vs. Iron Sheik plus Doug Gilbert, Devin Storm, Ace Starling, and Jim Cornette. For more info call 609-729-9000. At an NWA show in Florida, Sabu and Rob Van Dam did an angle with NWA President Howard Brody. The gimmick is that Brody claimed to offer Van Dam a deal to jump, and this is all angle, and when after beating Jerry Lynn in the main event, Van Dam called Brody into the ring to accept. Van Dam said that if Brody wanted him to leave ECW, he had to take Bill Alfonso and Sabu, and Brody agreed, and then all three jumped him. I guess they want to do an ECW versus NWA angle on non-ECW shows involving those people. Based on the brawl where Flash Flanagan legitimately attacked rival group wrestler Jerry Faith in Louisville at an Ian Rotten show, a lawsuit was apparently filed against Flanagan. Chris Kindred, Doug Gilbert, Ian Rotten, John Williams are the owners of the building where it took place. EBA on October 31st in Northfield, Vermont at the college has Nikolai Volkov and Iron Sheik. November 13th in Livermore Falls, Maine at the high school has Malia Hasaka, and November 21st in Brunswick, Maine at Bowdoin College has Rick Martel vs. Tito Santana. MMA. Bob Merowitz will be making his presentation to Mark Ratner of the Nevada State Athletic Commission about getting UFC sanctions sometime this week. Draka is also attempting to get into Nevada, although Maurice Smith and several of the other fighters from their last show in Los Angeles still haven't been paid. The plan right now is to air the October 16th UFC show live from the 5,000-seat Portuguesa Arena in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and the Jerry Bolander vs. Vitor Belfort match is very close to being a definite. The UFC strategy at this point appears to be to continue to run shows with a lower budget until the cable industry reverses its position, figuring that based on the direction of pro wrestling, that UFC can't be singled out for much longer. Of course, that's only a logical argument, and anyone who has followed this story knows logic has never entered into any of it. Their feeling is most of the problems at this point with non-carriage have to do with TCI and Time Warner, the two largest systems, not carrying the event. The TCI decision is largely due to Leo Hindery Jr. being the head of the company, and with the Atan merger, the hierarchy could change. The Time Warner decision was largely based on New York passing the law to ban UFC and Time Warner being based in New York, and that will be a more difficult obstacle to turn over. The November show at Tokyo Budokan Hall isn't cancelled, but looks like it'll be moved to a date in early 1999. Dan Severn increased his record to 23-3-2, beating 250-pound amateur wrestler Chris Franco in 3:06 when the match was stopped due to Franco's heavy bleeding in the main event of the Super Brawl show on August 4th in Honolulu. Severn has more recorded wins than any heavyweight in modern MMA annals. K1 announced its August 28th show at Tokyo Yoyogi Gym as a Japanese Grand Prix tournament for the Japanese entrant in the K1 Grand Prix. Earlier this year they had a match with Masaaki Sadake vs. Musashi, which went to a draw, to determine who would go to the big 16-man tournament. With no winner and with Musashi banged up after his match at the Nagoya Dome with Ernesto Hoost, they are doing an 8-man tournament which includes pro wrestler Yoji Anjo, believe it or not, and former pro wrestler Mitsuya Nagai. First round matches include Sadake vs. Anjo and Nagai vs. Tsuyoshi Nakahaku of Seto Kaikon Karate. As the storyline goes, both Anjo and Nagai are now training under Andy Hope. There will also be two main events on the show, Mike Bernardo vs. Andrew Thompson and his brother Carl Bernardo vs. former lead singer of the Doobie Brothers, Michael McDonald. Just kidding. ECW, we have little info on the pay-per-view buy rate other than the show did roughly the same buy rate as the previous show in the scattered markets that have reported, and that it did slightly more buys on USSB with the heavy promotion than it did on DirecTV for the prior show. USSB is going to air the ECW TV show now several times per week on its promotional station, and in exchange, ECW is going to stay with USSB as its provider on pay-per-view instead of going to the channel 101 on DirecTV, which is where all the other pay-per-view shows air on. The game continues to be played in the Sandman situation. As of press time, Sandman had not signed a new deal. Over the weekend, Paul Heyman had Sandman do a 3-minute job at the ECW arena for Just Incredible, which he ended up beaten up and left laying after being beaten with his own cane. And another quick job in Trenton, New Jersey to Credible. This either could start a new program, be forgotten, or be used as Sandman's swan song. The game Heyman is playing is to get the word out everywhere that he would use the money Sandman is being paid to try and buy out the contract of Chris Benoit from WCW. Whether that is even a possibility, and at least at this point it isn't, as Eric Bischoff has never even been approached, and it's hard to believe he'd go for the deal if he was. It has turned Heyman babyface and changed the mood of ECW fans and quite frankly a lot of employees and wrestlers from being mad or even concerned about the possibility of Sandman leaving,
to not caring if he comes or goes if it means they can get Benoit in exchange. It also theoretically gives Heyman more leverage in negotiating terms in his favor, because Sandman doesn't have a lot of options in wrestling, and certainly doesn't if he wants to be a star.
The reality is that whether Sandman stays or goes has almost no bearing on whether or not Benoit comes to ECW, but Heyman has cleverly positioned with everyone that to make people not care if Sandman leaves. As mentioned before many times, pro wrestling is not a business like a McDonald's where you figure you're going to sell this many hamburgers a year and budget accordingly. In an entertainment business, the top stars earn big money because they draw big money, and what Sandman is being paid has nothing to do with a finite amount of money budgeted for wrestling salaries, but whether or not Sandman draws the money he's being paid at the gate or the merchandise table. The idea that Sandman leaving would free up money means somebody made a mistake with Sandman's deal in the first place, and given the merchandise business he brings, I have a feeling that isn't the case.
Is leaving freeing up money for Benoit or Guerrero is as silly as all the guys in the WCW locker room thinking that if Hogan were forced out, that the $5 million he's making could be divided among all of them, not realizing that Hogan being there means a lot more than $5 million to the coffers at the other end. It's a smart leverage move by Heyman. If Benoit is available, and right now he isn't, he will be positioned on top, in which case whatever money the company can afford to pay him should be less than what he draws for the company. And that has nothing to do with what anyone else makes now, and very little, only to the point that one headliner would have to be moved mid-card
to do with what they will be making then.
There were a lot of banged up bodies by the end of the weekend. Rob Van Dam has a busted eye from an errant punch by Bubba Ray Dudley which needed several stitches, and he was limited to doing a run-in on August 9th. Jerry Lynn injured his hip in a match with Van Dam, and it went out on the first spot on August 9th against Bam Bam Bigelow. Bigelow showed up on August 9th looking like he'd been on the losing side of a street fight, and New Jack showed up on August 9th walking with a cane, although that may be an angle as New Jack may disappear for a while, with the storyline being that he was injured by Jack Victory. The New Jack Eric Kulas case was continued until October with no indictment because the judge who heard the case this week wasn't sure if this should be something more suited for a civil lawsuit rather than criminal charges. Ultimately, the DA in that area is going to have to make a decision whether he wants to prosecute. WHDH-TV in Boston ran a feature on the Kulas deal, including showing some of the footage of the incident but cut way before the real sick water faucet like bleeding, saying that what happens next can't air on television. August 8th at the ECW Arena drew the regular sellout of 1,400 for what was generally considered a very good show opening, with Axl Rotten and Balls Mahoney and Spike Dudley beating the FBI. Ulf Herman pinned John Kronus. The finish was supposed to be Lance Wright shoving Kronus off the top rope so Herman would get a tainted win, but Wright never shoved Kronus and Herman ended up getting a clean win. Lance Storm pinned Chris Condito in a match said to have been better than their pay-per-view match. Tammy wasn't there as she was off the entire weekend, having gotten some surgery done on August 4th and will be back next weekend. It was announced she wasn't there due to demands made by the WWF as part of her leaving. Storm then said that the WWF could ban Tammy from being at ringside for the match, but they couldn't stop her from coming to his hotel room later that evening. Van Dam pinned Lynn in the match that was the show stealer that everyone is raving about. Van Dam may have suffered a broken nose in this match. The highlight of the match was Lynn doing a swinging DDT off the top rope out of the ring through a table. Masato Tanaka pinned Mike Awesome in a match said to have been killed by the crowd. Apparently the crowd only wanted to see the powerbomb over the top through the table, and didn't react to anything waiting for the spot, and never got the spot. Even when they did hard chair shots or dives, the crowd really didn't pop. Taz, Sabu and Bam Bam Bigelow ended up doing a 30-minute draw in a three-way dance. The fans gave the three a standing ovation. Told it was pretty good most of the way but got bad at the end because it was too long. Credible beat Sandman in about 3 minutes. New Jack beat Jack Victory in a weapons match that was what you'd expect but also too long. Great finish, however. There was a garbage bin and Victory got a guitar from the bin to hit Jack with. Tommy Dreamer then came out of the bin also with a guitar and hit Victory from behind to start their program, and allowing Jack to win the match. The Dudleys came out and Joel Gertner said they wanted a tag title match that was promised them right there. Since Van Dam had worked 20 minutes and Sabu had worked 30 minutes and collapsed at the finish as a work, the champs were really beat up. The deal was that Sabu couldn't even wrestle, and rather than forfeit the belts, Van Dam faced both of them. Van Dam got destroyed as it went on and was hit with 3D. When a bandaged up Sabu came out of the locker room and put both through a table. The triple threat then came out, which brought out Taz to set up a future Taz and Sabu and Van Dam versus triple threat match. Bill Alfonso asked Taz to join Sabu and Van Dam, which got Sabu mad. Taz said no and left. The August 7th show in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania drew 2,600. It was a real wild crowd throwing a lot of bottles and drinks at the ring, and in the final matches it was dangerous not only because the crowd was throwing so much, but because the floor and ring were wet. August 9th in Trenton, New Jersey with the Walking Wounded show drew about 750. WCW.
Nothing new on the Jim Hellwig front other than he's scheduled for the August 17th Nitro in Hartford, Connecticut. Why they didn't announce that he was coming, nor have even hinted on TV that he would be coming, is mind-boggling. The guy's only going to mean something for ratings for a week or two anyway, so you might as well not give away the value of his debut, which would be his strongest impact on the rating, by not hyping it to death for weeks. A lot of people in this business get so hung up on surprises that they forget that surprises are good at times, but at other times the simple, direct and predictable approach in basic situations is the best, and the debut of Hellwig is a basic situation. No truth to any rumors about Hellwig doing an angle with DDP, at least not right away. The Tournament of Champions idea for Fall Brawl was dropped after someone figured out how hard it would be to get all those guys to job, so they are back to doing War Games as the main event. They may do War Games with 3 teams, Wolfpack, NWO Hollywood and WCW, which could be Hellwig and DDP and Goldberg and a 4th member. Hellwig will be known as the Warrior because there is still a legal battle ongoing between Hellwig and WWF for the rights to the name Ultimate Warrior. Don't expect anything to break officially with Ric Flair until the judge rules on his case, which is the same news as every week. Reports are everywhere that he's going back to WCW, and privately it appears Eric Bischoff has strongly suggested that might happen to Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko to satisfy their qualms about doing a Horseman angle without Flair, but nothing is a done deal. The judge ruling on the validity of his WCW agreement is expected to come either this month or early next month. Nitro on August 10th in Rapid City, South Dakota drew 5,197, a few hundred shy of capacity, and $115,846. Jim Duggan pinned Barbarian with a schoolboy in 342. After the match, Hugh Morris interfered, but Meng made the save. Meng then destroyed everyone in the world, including Duggan and all of WCW security, with the Tongan death grip to try and make him a monster for his match with Goldberg in the main event. Lex Luger challenged Bret Hart for a U.S. title match and Hart accepted, but Hart still claimed to be Sting's good friend. Eddie Guerrero pinned Magnum Tokyo in 115 with a frog splash. Canyon pinned Saturn in 612 when Raven interfered after Lodi distracted the ref and DDT'd Saturn. Same as their usual stuff with a lot of good moves, but something is missing. Steve McMichael pinned Sick Boy in 253 with a tombstone. McMichael is actually tons better than Duggan. Hogan did an interview challenging Goldberg to a title match and saying he'd be at ringside for the main event. Chris Jericho won the TV title from Stevie Ray in 455 when Giant choke slammed Ray and Jericho put him in the Lion Tamer and the ref stopped the match. How Ray can lose a belt he never won in the first place is beyond logic, although Jericho must be a great worker because this was the closest thing to a good Ray singles match ever. Rey Mysterio Jr. won a 3-way match over Lizmark Jr. and Psychosis in 704 when Psychosis Monkey flipped Mysterio Jr. into a Hurricane Rana on Lizmark Jr. for the pin. Real good match and the crowd in Rapid City was into it. Mysterio Jr. injured his knee during the match and collapsed off camera, leaving the ring. At press time the belief was that he stretched the ligaments in his bad knee and no word on if or how long he'll be out of action. That knee appears to give him trouble every time he lands, which is really getting scary to watch. Luger won the U.S. title from Hart in 1633 with the torture rack. Hart must be the greatest ring psychologist in existence to get the crowd so into a long match with Luger. There was nothing fancy, but everything made sense, and this match had more crowd intensity than any match on Nitro in a while. I suspect Hart will have regained the title on Thunder on August 13th before you read this. Juventud Guerrera retained the Cruiserweight title over a cleaned-up Billy Kidman in 344 with a 450. Guerrera looked great, but Kidman was a little off. Raven yelled at the flock and ended up having a match with Horace Boulder, who won when Saturn interfered, giving the Death Valley driver to Raven in 352. Good match, which is a shock with Boulder involved.
Curt Hennig beat Conan via DQ in 3:34 when Conan was caught choking him with his necklace, although Hennig got the necklace first. In a terrible tag title match where nobody did a thing, Giant and Hall retained, losing via DQ against Nash and Sting when Sting had Hall in the Scorpion, but Giant choke slammed the ref at 5:26. Finally, Goldberg pinned Meng with the jackhammer in 2:07. NWO Wolfpack and Hollywood were both at ringside.
After the match, Hogan hit Goldberg in the back with a pathetic chair shot that poor Goldberg had to sell, which was bad since he's never sold so much that looks so much better. Nash got the chair from Hogan before Goldberg turned around. Goldberg turned around and saw Nash in the ring and speared him just as the show went off the air. Goldberg delivered a fantastic 3 minutes of ratings, but his pops all week were down and there were boos after the show went off the air directed at him for attacking Nash. It's so weird to see WCW play a program all week that Kanyon had disappeared, but then constantly hyping The Tonight Show and seeing Leno introduce Kanyon, Eric Watts and Kidman, referred to as Chris, Eric and Billy, as his trainers in the comedy training video. They are building toward an Larry Zbyszko vs. Dusty Rhodes match for later this year, possibly Starrcade. August 5th was the Castrol Torture Test of the Week, aka Thunder in Casper, Wyoming drew 3,524 paying $86,418. It drew a 3.30 rating and 6.03 share for the live show and a 2.1 rating and 4.2 share for the replay. The show opened with the announcers doing damage control after the screwed up Sting angle from Monday. Seems Sting is still Wolfpack, but the mean dangerous Sting comes from the ceiling in black and white. The dual personality Sting is actually a Bischoff idea copied from the success of both Keiji Muto and Great Muta in Japan. Giant pinned Lizmark Jr. in 25 seconds with a choke slam. Psicosis beat Guerrera in 3:09 with a leg drop after Jericho hit Guerrera with the title belt unseen by special ref Malenko. Bischoff did his horrible segment. Liz showed up looking like hell. Bischoff got hit with a beer. Before the snipers started shooting, Page came out and destroyed the set and tackled Bischoff until the police dragged him off him. Where were all of Eric's friends while this was going on?
I know, that was a rhetorical question.
Meng NC Duggan in 1:36 when Morris and Barbarian attacked both.
Duggan has now surpassed the late Stan Frazier and Raja Lyon as the single worst wrestler in history.
Hall came out with a drink in hand trying to make a joke out of it.
Unfortunately, at this stage of the game it's no longer funny. Nor was McMichael beating Ray Viacor in 2:31 when Chavo showed up with the TV title belt and hit Ray with it and Ray chased him away for the finish.
Saturn won a handicap match over Sick Boy and Scotty Riggs in 2:28 with the Death Valley driver on Sick Boy.
After the match, Raven DDT'd Saturn. Eddie Guerrero beat Disco Inferno in 2:56 with a frog splash.
When Eddie was on the top rope, Magnum Tokyo pushed Eddie off, but he still landed on Disco for the pin.
Conan and Sting and Luger beat Hall and Hennig and Adams in 5:57 of a bad match when Conan schoolboyed Adams. They had two dark matches, with Mysterio Jr. beating Jericho in a non-title and Goldberg pinning Giant. The Time Warner higher-ups had major qualms about the angle on August 3rd where Bischoff was pretending to sexually harass Kimberly going over the line. Bischoff didn't react because he thought it was a great angle, and in my opinion it got real heat while going right up to but not crossing that imaginary line that no longer exists on WWF telecasts.
Although logic would say that with the Leno angle over, that the NWO late night segments with Bischoff are history.
But don't hold your breath. The band was told that they would be brought back, although people are told that at Wrestling All the Time. However, in Rapid City, the stage was set up for the segment and the only reason they didn't do it is because management forgot to contact the band to appear that night. Benoit has been very hesitant about signing a new deal, and at this point it appears the odds are that he will leave when his contract expires. WCW probably won't do a Horseman angle with Benoit involved unless he signs a new contract. Kazuhashi Shiryu should be returning as he was kind of in limbo over WCW screwing up his paperwork.
Ultimo Dragon had complications from his elbow surgery and the elbow swelled up badly. No word on his return.
Nash talked with Hogan and Bischoff and all agreed to work together for business, so the heat died down.
There was genuine internal concern as to whether or not Nash would even show up in Sturgis.
There are forces wanting to make Nitro more risque to compete with Raw and to have the Nitro girls in more revealing costumes to compete with Sable.
These are all in the idea stages, and with WCW winning the ratings this week, the pressure isn't as big to make far-reaching changes.
TNT's first of what looks to be quarterly boxing specials will be on September 22nd, headlined by Shane Mosley vs. Eduardo Morales for Madison Square Garden. TNT is getting into boxing since USA will be dropping Tuesday night fights in a few weeks. The boxing is going to be heavily promoted on Nitro in an attempt to cross over the two audiences. WCW Saturday Night on August 8 drew a 2.0 rating. Besides Sturgis, the only shows of the week were Casper and Rapid City, which combined did $69,026 in merchandise or $7.91 per head. In England for the period from April 3 to June 26, which are the most current figures available, Raw averaged 243,000 homes per week to Nitro's 242,000. Since the two shows started going head-to-head, Nitro has won 10 of the 15 weeks, although as in the US, Raw was picking up steam in late May. In an article in the August 3 Chicago Sun-Times about the falling standards of TV by Lyle Harris, it claimed that TNT was having second thoughts about Nitro due to its violence, quoting Terry Tingle, TNT's Vice President of Standards and Practices, as saying, "We are looking into the question right now about whether it's too violent." WWF. The WWF is getting into new business involving real estate. In a story that was carried nationally, Titan Sports was part of a conglomerate that were the top bidders for the Debbie Reynolds Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. The group headed by George Simon of Cleveland was the high bid in an auction that only drew 6 people, with a $9 million bid. Simon formed a Cleveland investment group as a joint venture with Titan Sports. A bankruptcy judge then turned down the bid because it didn't even cover the hotel's debt to creditors of $11.5 million, and a second auction was set up with the Titan Group again being top bid at $10.65 million. This is still a long way from a done deal, as major background checks are necessary to receive a gaming license in Nevada. The idea is to turn it into the WWF Hotel if it all flies. The hotel has been a big loser for years, as have most businesses in that area, as it's close to the convention center, but not the Strip. Reynolds lost her fortune in trying to maintain the business. WWF also placed the high bid in an auction for a restaurant which would be a WWF cafe-type deal at Times Square, but the people running Times Square turned down the WWF's bid because they didn't feel WWF fit with the image they are trying to revamp the area in. WWF is still looking for a Manhattan site for a theme restaurant, similar to WCW, which is opening a Nitro Cafe at the Excalibur in Las Vegas. Raw on August 10 in Omaha drew a sellout 7,601, paying $159,395. In stuff taped for Shotgun, DOA beat Dick Togo and Shoichi Funaki via DQ. Edge beat Brian Christopher. Tiger Ali Singh did his $1 Million Man deal, a new vampire-type character called something like Gangrel. David Vampire Warrior Heath beat Scott Taylor, and Bob Holly, still in his Midnight Express gear, beat Jesus Castillo. In a dark match, Farouk and Too Cold Scorpio beat Headbangers. Raw started with Mankind doing an interview saying he couldn't trust anyone in the WWF but Vince McMahon, and asked for McMahon to come out. McMahon did, but started yelling at Mankind for being weak and pathetic. McMahon was really overacting. McMahon said Kane and Undertaker were in collusion to destroy everyone else in the WWF. Paul Bearer and Kane came out. Vince and Bearer argued, and Vince claimed it was Undertaker in the Kane costume and went to take off his mask. The lights went off for a while, and when they were back on, Kane was gone and Undertaker had his hands on McMahon. Undertaker beat on Mankind and Bearer and chased McMahon away. Luna beat Jackie when Sable shoved Jackie off the top and she crotched herself, and Luna got the pin with a splash off the ropes that actually missed in 225. They are trying to position the oddities as this generation's bushwhackers, with fans dancing as they come to the ring. Sable gave Luna the bikini contest winning trophy that Jackie had won. Darren Drozdov beat Savio Vega 25-0 in the Brawl for All. Fans booed all 3 rounds but popped when Drozdov took Vega down. Vega looked like a completely different person than in his first match, which leads me to believe he wasn't nearly recovered from his neck injury. LOD was to face Southern Justice, but Hawk was doing his stoned act and fell down the ramp. The officials wouldn't let him wrestle. Both guys beat up on Animal while Hawk was being dragged away. Drozdov made the save, and it's interesting Drozdov was booked in an angle so soon after a brawl. Jeff Jarrett, now growing a beard and trying to look rougher, clocked Drozdov with a guitar that said "Don't piss me off" and began shaving off some of his hair. This Hawk deal may also be an angle to have Animal and Drozdov form a tag team and get rid of Hawk. DX came out and everyone called everyone a jack-off, and Chyna pulled down her pants revealing this weird mutated half-male/half-female butt, and then Triple H pulled down his pants as well. I guess they tried during the commercial break to get women to take off their tops, but no takers in Omaha. Austin did an interview and threw Michael Cole in the shower. It sucks being him. Godfather came out with 3 sleazy-looking broads for a match with Vader. Godfather offered Vader all 3 for one night if he didn't wrestle him, and Vader accepted the offer. but as he was leaving, Bart Gunn KO'd Vader with a left and did a pull-apart with Godfather to set up their match. Gunn also yelled at Jim Ross saying that he's making excuses for Williams losing with the torn hamstring and not giving him credit since he KO'd Williams as he told Ross he would do, as apparently before the match Gunn had bragged to Ross that he was going to KO Williams. Dustin Runnels did this announcement telling people not to watch the next segment because it deals with genitalia and fornication outside of marriage, and they did a spoof saying the announcement was paid for by religious groups that hate all forms of entertainment, clearly trying to make fun of critics of their direction. I think it's a preemptive strike knowing that in the direction they are going, they are about to get some major heat. Runnels did an interview in the Charleston Post-Courier claiming his gimmick was a shoot, but after this interview, that suggestion is a joke. Val Venus came out with John Wayne Bobbitt in a really dumb segment as Bobbitt came off as he is a first-rate moron. Anyway, what happened last week is that they put Val's dick on the chopping block, but it was cold so it shrunk and Bobbitt made the save turning out the lights. Why he was in the neighborhood is never explained. And while he chopped nothing. Val then dumped Mrs. Yamaguchi-san because she was more trouble than she was worth and threw her a battery to keep herself satisfied. Bradshaw somehow beat Mero in the brawl for all. This was the closest and most heated match to date, as I don't know what it was, but either they were working or they didn't like each other. Mero won the first 2 rounds standing, but Bradshaw got 1 takedown in each round, making it 10-10 after 2. In the 3rd round, Bradshaw went for a takedown, but Mero held onto the ropes, which should be illegal but isn't. The ref called for a break and Mero let go, but Bradshaw didn't break and then took him down, and ref Jack Doan called a takedown, which was ludicrous officiating. Still, Mero won that round standing, so it was 15-15, but in reality Mero should have won. They did a 1-round overtime and it was the same story. Bradshaw got 1 takedown and Mero won the round standing to make it 20-20, and then Bradshaw for no reason was announced as the winner. They were doing ring intros for the Four Corners match when Ken Shamrock ran in and put the ankle lock on Owen Hart while DX kept Rocky Maivia from helping. D'Lo Brown ended up subbing for Hart in the Four Corners with Mankind and Kane, New Age Outlaws and Austin and Undertaker with the tag belts at stake. These are more illogical matches, as with the first team to score a pin wins rules. Strategically it makes no sense to ever tag anyone other than your partner. It went 14-30 and was pretty good, especially when Austin was in, but slowed toward the end because Undertaker looked pretty bad. Finish saw Kane pin Undertaker after 1 choke slam, so Mankind and Kane got the belts, and then Undertaker popped up as if he wasn't hurt again, making it look like he laid down for his brother to screw Austin out of the tag title. For Sunday Night Heat, Triple H and X-Pac beat Southern Justice via DQ when Jarrett interfered. Jackie challenged Sable to any kind of a match of Sable's choosing. Bart Gunn beat Vader via DQ when Godfather attacked Bart. Mankind and Kane kept the belts, beating Animal and Drozdov. From the tapings on August 11th in Des Moines, Iowa before a sellout crowd. It opened with a tryout where Charlie Norris beat Derek Dukes with a foot to the face in a horrible match. For Shotgun, Edge beat Papichulo, Holly beat Taylor and Vader beat Castillo. They taped a few matches for Sunday Night Heat for August 23rd with Southern Justice over Kurgan and Golga via DQ when Luna interfered. The oddities got the crowd to dance with them a la Bushwhackers. Runnels came out during the match with a sign saying he's coming back. After the match, Jarrett came out and cut some of Luna's extensions. It appears they are building toward a hair versus hair match with Jarrett versus X-Pac. In a European title match, Brown, billed now from Munich, Germany, beat Animal via DQ in 30 seconds. Hawk came out stoned in street clothes. Mark Henry splashed him and left him dead. Henry started helping Brown, which brought out Drozdov for the save, which caused the DQ. In a brawl for all semifinal, Bart Gunn beat Godfather via knockout in the 3rd round, which got a big pop after stunning him in the 2nd round. Godfather was out for a long time and the officials acted concerned. Several reports live said this match looked worked and the finish does fit into the new storyline. The other brawl saw Bradshaw beat Drozdov 15-5, so Bradshaw vs. Bart is the finals either August 24th in Philadelphia or at SummerSlam. They opened Raw with Austin banging on McMahon's door demanding a match with Undertaker, and McMahon agreed, but it would have to be non-title because of SummerSlam. The triple threat match with Shamrock, Severn and Hart saw Severn win by choking out Shamrock. The entire match was Shamrock versus Hart with Severn just watching. Finally, out of nowhere, Severn choked out Shamrock and also choked out Steve Blackman. Gangrel, or whatever Dave Heath's name is, beat Christopher. He comes out drinking blood and spills it all over him, doing a vampire gimmick with a puffy shirt a la Jerry Seinfeld, Tom Cruise, and La Parka. Hart announced that Severn is going to be his trainer for his match with Shamrock at SummerSlam, and when Shamrock found out, he went nuts again.
DOA beat Farouk and Scorpio in a horrible match which was mainly backdrop for an angle where Nation attacked DX backstage, and they wound up at ringside. Scorpio was distracted by their brawling, allowing DOA to switch and pin him. It wasn't Scorpio's night as he was blowing moves left and right. Nation vs DX had a 4-on-3 brawl. Owen wasn't involved, and Triple H bled really bad and Billy Gunn bled as well. Not sure of the finish, but Triple H was a mess and it was done ECW style with the garbage cans but not as many weapons. Jarrett came out during this and cut some of X-Pac's hair. Singh offered $500 to a guy to lick his servant's toes, but the fan told him to suck it. He offered a second fan $600 and he licked the toes and ate food stuck in the toes. And if that wasn't enough of recycled angles, Sable and Jackie did the same arm wrestling gimmick on every TV show since the beginning of time, where Jackie is losing and turns the table over and smashes the bikini contest trophy over her head. Venus then had to beat all 4 members of Kaientai to get a match with Yamaguchi. He beat Teo with a fisherman suplex, Funaki in 10 seconds with a power slam, Togo in 2 minutes. With the money shot but lost clean in the middle to Taka's Michinoku driver. After the match, Mrs. Jailbait slapped him. Val made a comeback on all of them and sprayed them all with a super soaker. Sable called Jackie a bitch and challenged her, and Jackie accepted for SummerSlam. Undertaker vs. Austin went only 45 seconds. Undertaker came out in Kane's costume, but Austin pulled off the mask revealing Undertaker, and they brawled backstage to where Austin threw Undertaker in the back of the hearse and locked it. As he opened the door, it was Undertaker in the driver's seat. Austin wound up in the ring drinking a beer. Slaughter told him if he kept drinking he'd be fined $1,000 and suspended, so Austin gave Slaughter the stunner and kept drinking. By the time it was over, he'd given Slaughter 3 stunners and Briscoe 1. They taped a few more matches after for Heat with Hart and Severn over headbangers, Maivia challenging Triple H to a ladder match, Jarrett over Drozdov via DQ in 90 seconds when X-Pac came out and cut some of Jarrett's hair, and Taka pinned Scorpio with a screwed-up finish, and after Val challenged Taka to a match on the August 24th Raw. Apparently the arrest of former WWF wrestler Charles Bryan Lee the first weekend of the month was on a domestic abuse charge. There will be a risque Sable video released in November. Bruce Newman, who formerly wrote for Sports Illustrated and may have been the one who did the 1985 cover story on WWF, is doing the TV Guide Wrestling cover story next month. Mankind did a great interview on Sunday Night Heat. While this will never hurt ratings because bad announcing doesn't hurt ratings, the announcing on Heat sucks. Jim Ross gets taken down a mile by Shane McMahon, whose act is getting old after 2 weeks because the announcer predominantly shouldn't be doing an act but be explaining the act. Actually, McMahon is exactly like Jim McInerney, an overenthusiastic carnival barker type trying to use hip terminology of the time period that did a good job with roller games about 20 plus years ago. But the key word was about 20 years ago, and just as Ross' work made the Nitro crew obsolete playing dumb guys talking to 10-year-olds, it makes 70s guys even more obsolete. The only house show of the week was August 9th in Kansas City, Missouri, which drew 16,733, paying $276,839 or a few hundred shy of capacity. It was a real hot crowd headlined by the same triple threat matches in previous weeks, with Austin pinning Kane after the stunner. Merchandise for the week was $177,682 or $7.30 per head. The crowd in Omaha was heavily boozed up and really bad, with lots of complaints about poor security. Fans were throwing tons of stuff at the ring, and a fan got into the ring during the Four Corners match, although the cameras stayed away from him. There were a lot of arrests before it was over. After the January 1999 Royal Rumble at the Anaheim Pond on January 24th, Raw tapings are January 25th in Phoenix and January 26th in Tucson. The second pay-per-view on 1999 will be February 21st in Cleveland. The Toronto Examiner did a lengthy piece of Val Venus before the Sky Dome show last week. TSN edits out a little more than half of his act. Sean Morley stated that there have been a few lines presented to me to say that I won't do. I won't do something that I don't feel should be on TV. I have my own set of morals, and if I don't feel comfortable doing it, I won't. We inadvertently left out last weekend's ratings, as on August 1st Livewire did a 1.5 and Superstars on August 2nd did a 1.7. For August 8th and August 9th it was Livewire at 1.8 and Superstars at 2.2. Wrestling Observer Newsletter August 17, 1998. Post Office Box 1228 U.S. Postage paid. Campbell, California 95009-1228, permit number 5634. San Jose, California. This is the end of this program. See you next time.